Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Hyung-ha Kim. I'm from CRIS, and it is a pleasure to be here as the MC of this conference. From now on, we will start the Dasan Conference 2019, organized by KOFSFT. This conference is named after a scholar from 200 years ago, Jeong Ya-kyung, who was a proliferative author, dedicating his life to seeking truth based on concrete evidence as well as promoting pragmatic spirit of science. Since 2009, KOFST has organized this yearly conference and honored him by naming it with his pen name, Dasan. This year's theme, the role of future generations in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, was chosen to exchange views between generations, recognize the importance of SDI in attaining the SDGs, and continue on the spirit endorsed in the resolution of last year's conference. First, I'd like to invite Professor Emeritus Kyung-chan Min from Yonsei University on behalf of President Myung-ja Kim to give us a few welcoming words. Please give him a warm applause.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is my great honor and privilege to welcome all of you from overseas and domestic side. First of all, I'd like to welcome all of you for this the new approach for the Dasan Conference. Dasan Conference, since it started in 2002, has organized in-depth academic events by inviting eminent scholars and experts representing cutting-edge science and technology areas, aims at keeping abreast of the latest research development and establishing international research networks. These years, the international community has been stepping up its efforts to achieve inclusive society in pursuit of sustainable coexistence and the happiness of all mankind. That's the reason why we set up a theme of this year, the role of future generation in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, started from the United Nations. I wish all of you to enjoy this conference, to have new relations, new networks, new ideas for the next generation. I sincerely hope Dasan Conference 2019 will add great value to your endeavors and be cherished as a landmark event. I trust that today's discussions and deliberation will contribute to the sustainable environment for the next generation. Enjoy this conference. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Min. Before we start, I'd like to introduce distinguished guests. We have President Kim here. Would you like to give a few words to the young generation forum members? Okay. Yes, okay. I see. She just said that she gave words already, so we will go to the next. And I'd like to introduce distinguished guests from other countries. We are pleased to have the first secretary, Mr. Purno Widodo from the Embassy of Indonesia in Korea. Could you please stand up and you like to give us a few words?
Yeah, hello everyone. Annyeong hasimika. My name is Purno Widodo from Indonesian Embassy. I feel very honored to be here with young generation like you, the futures of this world. And I wish us all have a wonderful, fruitful, and enjoyable conference today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We are also pleased to have Mr. Sulia Chansomfo, Second Secretary at the Embassy of Laos in Korea, and also Mr. Yem Sofal, Trade Counselor at the Embassy of Cambodia in Korea, here with us today. Please give them a warm applause.
Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, thanks for the organizer that invited me to this event. And I hope this event will be a platform we can share the really meaningful of the ODA and something like this. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Sofal? Okay. Next, we have a short lecture prepared by Professor Sang-wook Park from Seoul National University, and the topic is Global Networking for Sustainable Development Goals. Dr. Park?
Thank you very much, Dr. Kim. Good lunchtime, wonderful participants and honored guests. And especially nice to see you, younger generation fellows. Please continue to enjoy your lunch. I feel privileged to deliver this presentation, which will begin the Dasan Conference 2019. I'd like to express my sincere gratitude to chairpersons of Dasan Organization Committee and President of Korean Federation of Science and Technology Societies. On 22nd November 2018, the Dasan Conference Organizational Committee announced the resolution of the Dasan Conference 2018, say the Dasan Resolution. This is for a quick recap of the resolution. It says, we recognize that the advancement in science and technology is held accountable for the global challenges. Acknowledge that the role of S&T is instrumental in achieving sustainable and inclusive society. The social responsibilities entrusted to scientists and engineers are as follows. The purpose of R&D should not be weighted towards economic growth, which may cause irreversible damage to the environment. Careful attention should be paid to prevent the widening social inequality from uneven distribution of benefits from S&T. The importance of social values and knowledge sharing should not be underestimated. We, the scientists and engineers, call for following actions to attain inclusive society for sustainable future. The advances in science and technology could trigger new risks. We commit ourselves to reinforcing interaction between science and society. We are determined to rally scientists and engineers' engagement in the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs. We pledge to pay close attention to the social issues of the community while ensuring that R&D contribute to the public's well-being and better quality of life as well as to the social innovation. We resolve to open up scientific knowledge through global and regional networks and empower communities. Following in the last year's resolution, we should move forward to begin to make differences by putting our conviction into actions. Here's the agenda for the Dasan Conferences 2019, which is now going on through this afternoon. We will be focusing on the SDGs. In session 1 and 2, Science, Technology and Innovation and Official Development Assistance for SDGs will be the subject. I'd like to remind you that Korea used to be a recipient of foreign development aid. It is more than fair to say Korea was a very good recipient, especially in the field of science and technology. Thanks to the aid, as well as the devotions of Korean scientists and engineers, Korea became one of the most advanced countries in the world today. Now it is time to pay it forward. As a member of OECD DAC, Korea has started helping developing world with science and technology ODA. For instance, in Vietnam, just like Korea was helped by the US, a Vietnamese version of the KIST, namely V-KIST, is under construction. A number of Korean NGOs, public research institutes, and social ventures are working with people in developing countries on sustainable, appropriate technologies. Every year, hundreds of government officials and academics from developing countries come to Korea to learn Korea's STI policy and to share Korea's experience of successful socio-economic development. Let's move on a little further. At this time being, we are at the crucial point for transformation. What should we do with science, technology, and innovation for the sustainable future? The weight of innovation efforts would better be moved from old values to new ones, which have been seldom regarded by scientists and engineers. For example, from national to global system of innovation, from productivity to sustainability, from economic growth to sustainable development, from risky to socially responsible innovation, from wealth creation to well-being, from winner-take-all to fairness for all. And from now on, scientists and engineers are to band together with civil society. Replacing the famous triple helix model of innovation, the quadruple helix model with a newly added citizen strand has paid growing attention. R&D should involve societal issues, and science, technology, and innovation should be open, transparent, responsible, and explainable more than ever. It's time to fight against the remains of past mistakes. It is time for addressing grand challenges facing mankind, such as climate change or economic polarization. R&D activities used to stand apart from their consequences. In this slide, gray arrows show the traditional logic pathway how R&D and innovation indirectly contribute to public welfare. From now on, R&D and innovation should directly confront environmental and societal challenges. We call it as transformative approach. I'd like to emphasize that the idea and spirit of addressing grand challenges and the transformative approach are nothing new. All of those were already declared within the Dasan resolution of the last year. It's time for real-world actions. We, the scientists and engineers, put the Dasan resolution into actions with respect for science, technology, and innovation in order to address confronted grand challenges and to attain inclusive society for sustainable future, upholding the universal values of mankind. And we want you all to join us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Park, for your encouraging and insightful words. Now we'd like to start with a main program here, and we will start with session 1. The topic is Sustainable Development Goals and Science, Technology, and Innovation. 2 presentations will be made back-to-back, and the first presenter is Professor Kyung-Yeol Park from KAIST, and his topic is Digital Technology and Inclusive Development. Please welcome him with a warm applause.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Park Kyung-Yeol from KAIST Graduate School of Science, Technology, and Policy. Actually, I was just told from the organizers that the most of audience are university students. That's why I kind of tweak my presentation. So while we're having this new presentation, I'd like to discuss about kind of implication of my presentation first. So this is new, right? Okay. Right, so indeed, it is a great my honor to have a presentation at Dasan Conference in 2019 today. So I'd like to thank you very much for your time as well. Today I'm going to talk about digital technology and inclusive development. So it's been a long time to discuss about the establishment sort of causal relationship. Go back. Can I use this one? Sorry? Okay. So, so-called STI, Science and Technology and Innovation, and socio-economic development in general. But it is quite complex to simply define the roles of STI in development, in particular in the context of developing countries, and is, of course, it's a huge subject. So today, given this time limit, I'd like to focus on the roles of digital technologies, particularly talking about SDGs number 17, enhancing partnership for the SDGs. So I will mainly discuss how we can utilize digital technologies and data platform for better monitoring and evaluation in global SDGs partnership in the end. Okay, next please. Okay. So let's start from these simple questions. Do science and technology always lead to development? Of course, STI, Science and Technology and Innovation, has been considered as one of the most fundamental driving forces in socio-economic development, mainly from neoclassical economics framework. So that's why we're here to discuss about this issue. But as we all know, it is very complex to answer, as well as quite difficult to develop a simple causal link between STI and SDGs. Why? First of all, there might be many different confounding factors in this causal relationship. And secondly, surprisingly, the linear technical rational logic for the causality between the adoption of new technology in the context of developing countries and better development outcomes yet lacks theoretical or empirical understanding in academic research perspective. Next, please. Because of the nature of concept development and its local embeddedness in a particular context, development is not apolitical. It is value-laden, and it has very contextual meaning. So when you talk about development, SDGs or whatever you want, it is very important to ask development for whom and development for what? And who drives development agenda? And who wins and loses in global development policy setting? And whose voices is louder? And who has ownership in this policy? So when you talk about the roles of science and technology and innovation, you really need to ask that particular STI policy, is it driven by local community or purely driven by technological innovation, or it's just donor-funded project? So actually this is my kind of main conclusion today's presentation. So my own motivation of these kind of very rough and general questions was actually conceived during my previous working experiences in the field of international development. I heard many of the participants in this session is the university students. That's why I can see a lot of foreign students as well. Do you really come to Korea to attend this session, or are you working and studying in Korea, particularly foreign students? Okay. So anyway, you might want to think about what do you mean by development? What do you mean by sustainable development in the context of your own country or in your own community? and how much is each SDGs 17 goals are relevant. So before we talk about the issue in this session, so I'd like to share 3 stories that I experienced firsthand. So first, almost 15 years ago, I was the Korea International Cooperation Agency volunteer computer teacher at Arusha Technical College in Arusha in Tanzania. During my stay, I witnessed that there was frequent mismatch between donor-driven ICT projects and actual needs in my school. So it was before SDGs. So as you might know, MDGs was established around 2000, so which has education as one of the core component in the HDI, Human Development Index, the framework. So ICT for Education project has been predominantly diffused in sub-Saharan African countries, but I witnessed the loss of donor-centric initiatives without local consideration. And later, during my study as a research assistant, I had a chance to be involved in OLPC project. Have you ever heard about OLPC project? So it's one of the kind of most popular ICT for education projects, one laptop per child project in the field of international development cooperation. So this initiative has arguably turned out to be a failure case. What's notable about this project is that, as shown in this article, people implementing the project believe that even dropping these tablets from helicopters would bring some sort of miracle in the local community, but it's not. Slightly different but similar assumption was found when I was working for the World Bank on Kenya Open Data Project, which was also donor-funded information systems. Initially, it was considered as a best practice of data for development initiative, but it quickly lost its initial momentum. And Kenya also lost its position as a sort of symbolic leader in ICT innovation in sub-Saharan Africa. So the common underlying theme of these projects or these stories is that all of these projects were funded and developed and designed by the donors, but more importantly, they have been criticized of their sort of technical rational perspective or technological deterministic perspective view. So once technology is adopted, or once STI is adopted, the story stops there. So in this view, technological innovation is always supposed to be greatly diffused across space and time, disregarding the complexity of social or political or institutional context. So I became more critical on the current trend of ICT projects in international development, and I become more interested in what are the challenges in STI in development and how we can overcome, so that how technology actually translate into the actual development in the recipient country. So these type of questions are frequently investigated in an independent research field, ICT for development, which maybe I will expect Robert will give you a sort of overview of ICT and development later. So it's basically a multidisciplinary research area that integrates mainly information systems, and public management, and development studies. But there are roughly, in summary, there are roughly 2 major research trends in this area, like what's the role of the STI and SDGs. So like the stories, there is a significant dominance of technical rational perspective. So from this perspective, like technology fixed perspective, ICT is seen as an independent variable and also sort of material force which determines certain behavior of individuals and organizations, producing very predictable changes. But in spite of this trend, there is a growing critical research on the social implications of ICTs in the context of developing country. So our research lies in the broad theoretical umbrella of the second, which I'm currently working on the different project in KAIST. So what we are working on in our lab in KAIST is more likely from the transdisciplinary perspective based on the field-oriented and context-specific research. So we are particularly interested in the use of emerging digital platforms in developing countries, and more interested in the challenges of ongoing ICT-enabled open data initiatives. So the project includes research on digital technology, digital inequality, and GIS-based mapping projects for better aid transparency and coordination in the field. So roughly, the unit of analysis of our research interest is a bit more macro policy perspective, how the international aid governance, how the SDG governance have been institutionalized in the field, and what are the roles of data in this field, which is often called ICT and Sustainable Development Goals. Okay, so because digital technologies has been the core of debate in the global field of aid, there might be many different international development agendas since the Marshall Plan in 1948. Recently, pretty often, major international development agencies has highlighted the opportunities of ICTs and sustainable development goal. And more importantly, we're experiencing kind of the big data and the open data era. So World Bank and major international development agencies, they started to open up their own data, which was not accessible before the 2010. And there was a sort of the milestone in United Nations Development Framework. Next page, please. So, the new global partnership for data for sustainable development goal is also the milestone. And then there was an ongoing series of UN data forum in South Africa, and also last year, this year, Dubai. So key issues here. So, but still, data for development is moving target in academic research. And there's a lack of theoretical understanding on what data, what kind of exact data for SDGs mean by. It is really important to discuss further who owns the data and who produces the data, for whom and for what purposes. But there are two core assumptions of data for development initiatives. First, contemporary development practice unquestionably benefit from the growing accessibility and availability of data, new data sources. And secondly, the impressive development in computational tools for data collection and analysis. But again, more importantly, we should ask whether this kind of collective passion on the use of big data and open data in international development and sustainable development is just passing another fad, or whether this is a kind of a real game changer. So these opportunities of emerging open data set, which has powerful computational tools for data collection and analysis, has been discussed in SDGs, particularly in number 17. As number 17 clearly indicate that high quality, timely, and reliable data is crucial for monitoring and evaluation in SDGs. In particular, under the 17, strengthen the means of implementation and revitalize the global partnership. Subsection 18 and 19, which is directly related to data and monitoring and accountability, and highlight the use of diverse development data sources. So for monitoring and evaluation of SDGs progress, there might be many different challenges in different contexts or in different countries, but one of the most significant chronic problems of development initiatives is lack of transparency and lack of coordination among stakeholders. So what this means is that different donors come to the same place and do very similar activities without coordination. So as shown in this figure, there were a lot of bilateral and multilateral stakeholders, which means donors, working in overlapping sectors across Indonesia in 2010. The blue nodes represent the theme of overlapping funding activities. The point is that it is very difficult to know who is doing and what kind of aid projects in where. So this lack of aid coordination and transparency is widely discussed mainly from the perspective of new institutional economics framework. The most commonly cited problem is the increased transaction costs suffered by development partners. So lack of coordination is understood to result in duplications in donors' activities and increase delivery cost and undermine recipient government capacity and eventually harm sustainable development. So among this problem, data issue have been considered to be the most fundamental challenges. So building on this debate and called for improved sharing information and sharing SDG data, also based on the ODA data as well. Different data platforms have been implemented in many recipient countries. So with this backdrop, next, please. Next. Once again, please. Okay. So it has animation. So having started from the UK government, surprisingly in 2009, actually the US president, former President Barack Obama, actually also they initiated Open Government Partnership in 2008, but it's kind of oxymoron because the World Bank has never been innovative. The World Bank initiated, at that time, tried to find an alternative legitimacy in the field of aid and change their priority from financing for development projects to the sort of knowledge disseminating for sharing development data. So, so they initiated open data initiative. It's okay. So open data is a data can be freely used, reused, and redistributed by anyone in machine-readable format. So I particularly was involved in the mapping for result project. So it's basically the platform geocoded all bank finance project. It's more than 30,000 projects with the latitude and longitude. And then you can, this is kind of Google platform, so you can actually access the detailed information. You can zoom in, you can access more the further detail of the development projects. And so in this SDG data platform, there are particular technological functionalities in common. So the first one is the aid information platform implemented in Indonesia for better transparency a couple of years ago. And like this second figure, it is expected to enhance aid coordination by identifying where the duplications of donors' activities exist. And another important common functionality is the linkage the two existing subnational SDG data set. So like this third figure, by using infant mortality data, it is expected to investigate where the mismatch between the needs for health projects and current health activities are. So the assumption is that you can have a better aid targeting based on this data platform. So there's also participatory process of data sharing, a so-called MAP Kibera project when I was working for the International Development Agency. So MAP Kibera is an open source project started in 2009 in response to the lack of data and information available for the Kibera district of Nairobi, Kenya. Actually, it was one of the largest slums in the world, which neighbors forest. So it showed official map as forest. The Kenyan authorities were unable to make an informed decision what kind of services and utilities were needed in terms of SDGs in the slum, since they did not understand what was there. So the MAP Kibera project is an example of data-driven or the community power mapping-driven, which was relatively successful in a situation where commercial mapping providers would never venture, arguably. So this is one of the example. How many minutes do I have? Okay, it's right on time. Okay, can you just, we can discuss later. So recently there's also the open opportunity to use remote sensing. Next, please. So some implications for the academic research in ICTD field. And maybe I can highlight one point and for the conclusion. So next slide, please. Okay. So although we have such growing promise, we need to careful reflection on this data for development initiatives. I think we have these kind of major issues in particular. But I'd like to highlight that contextualization of digital data for research and also policymaking is crucial. So all data is social data. So information platform, if you like, or information systems are very complex and dynamic compositions of digital technologies. And whether it's business systems or public database holding water or environment data or data collection, processing, and dissemination through these systems reflects some sort of forms of purposeful of social agencies, which has been collected and classified and recorded by human agency. So it's really important to what kind of exact SDG data is very important in the context of particular context and then particular country and particular sector. And we'll also discuss in the Q&A session for further discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Park. Dr. Park has emphasized the importance of transparency, coordination, and to solve the mismatch in ODA. Please stay with us for the panel discussion later. The second presentation will be given by Mr. Robert De Jesus. Mr. De Jesus is a program officer of the UN APCICT/SCAP. His title is An Overview of ICTs and Sustainable Development. Please invite him, please welcome him to the stage.
Good afternoon. My name is Robert De Jesus. I'm a program officer at the United Nations Asian and Pacific Training Center on ICT for Development. We are a regional institute under the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific. Let me begin by thanking the Korean Federation of Science and Technology Society for inviting APCICT to be part of this conference on a topic that is very timely and which is actually at the heart of what we do in the center. I see that there are many young people in the audience today who are what we call digital natives. You live and you sleep with social media, using mobile apps every day. And I think if there's one very simple message that I would like to send to all these digital natives is that we may be taking these technologies, these mobile phones for granted, but actually these technologies, when used effectively, particularly in developing countries, it can actually make a very big impact on the lives of people. Of vulnerable groups, of women, of youth. So my presentation for today will focus more on the role of digital technologies for development. And I would like to share with you also some of the work that we are doing in APCICT with regard to capacity building in this area. So I think most of you have heard already of this notion of fourth industrial revolution, no? And every day you see in the news, you read articles and you talk about robotics, artificial intelligence, 3D printing, Internet of Things. So these are like very exciting technologies that are happening nowadays, and which is actually changing the way we live, the way we work, and the way we interact with each other and with communities. In fact, these are not just the only technologies that are emerging today. OECD recently came up with this broad categorization of key emerging technologies. You can see you have the digital technologies. Many of us are very familiar with this. But you also have the biotechnologies, advanced materials, which is very useful in the manufacturing sector, in industries, and also technologies that have energy and environment applications. Now, these technologies are increasingly becoming interlinked with each other, no? So for example, cloud computing, Internet of Things, blockchain, they in a way actually influence and strengthen each other. And these technologies can also be used together to address a particular development challenge. For example, the use of drones, sensors, and Internet of Things can be very useful in disaster risk reduction activities, which is very useful, particularly in disaster-prone countries. Now, those technologies are what we would call as general-purpose technologies. No? So they have applications across sectors, and they are increasingly being used in many disciplines. And it's because of this general-purpose technology that we think of digital technologies as enabling tools for socioeconomic development. Now, countries that are increasingly becoming innovative and using these technologies are, in effect, becoming increasingly competitive. This is a very simple graph. We're using here two global indicators. One is the Global Innovation Index, and another one, the Global Competitiveness Index. And when you look at the countries and where they fall, you can see that the advanced countries like Singapore, Korea, Australia, which have very high innovation indices, are actually also very competitive. And it's precisely because of the contribution of these technologies in their economic growth and development. But we should think of technologies as contributing not only for economic growth, but actually because of their, that they can make a big difference in the achievement of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals that was adopted by the United Nations in 2015 under the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Now, maybe for the benefit of the young generation that is here today, one thing to keep in mind in this 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development is that there are three key principles. One is the principle of inclusion, that economic growth and development should include everyone, regardless of your race, your gender, your ethnicity, your geography, or your situation. So development should be felt by all. The other one is resilience. These days we live in a very, we live in the impacts of climate change, no? So it should be resilient development that can withstand the impacts of climate change or any other environmental shocks or changes. And the principle of sustainability. So this is where the three pillars of development come in, not only the social and economic, but also the environmental, and that development that meet the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations. Now, what we need to remember is that digital technologies should leave no one behind, and that we should use these technologies to reduce inequalities between groups and individuals and prioritize the furthest behind. In our center, our work has been to strengthen the capacities of countries in Asia and the Pacific on how to utilize digital technologies in their national development strategies and programs. But one challenge that we have in using digital technologies is that in the region, there's a persistent digital divide. Most of the frontier technologies that's happening right now would not be used by these countries if there's no access to information and communication technologies. So much of these frontier technologies would depend on ensuring access to the use of ICT. So, for example, right now there are 3.9 billion people, or 53% of the world population, who are still not using the internet. And half of the world's population still do not have mobile phones, and 450 million people still live out of reach of a mobile signal. Now, in Asia and the Pacific, we also see this digital divide. Frontier technologies would require a very stable internet connection, broadband connection, no? But when you look at the fixed broadband connection in the Asia and the Pacific, you can see that the high-income countries have higher subscription rates. But if you look at the low-income countries, those countries would be the one in orange and green. And you can really see a very big digital divide with regard to access to broadband internet. And the same is true with mobile broadband subscription. You can see a very significant a gap between the high-income countries and the low-income countries. So these digital technologies, as I mentioned earlier, would make a big difference in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. No? So these SDGs replaced the MDGs that were adopted in 2000 until 2015. In the MDGs, you have this focus on maternal health, HIV, poverty, health, these simple indicators, no? But the SDGs are more encompassing and more inclusive. And this is a very rough categorization of the various SDGs. But here you can see that now we actually have to focus on livelihoods, agriculture, health, education, water, sanitation, and power, infrastructure and disaster risk management, governance and human rights, and environmental protections. And because of the general purpose characteristic of digital technologies, these digital technologies would be very useful in achieving these various SDGs. Now, I just have some series of examples on how digital technologies are now being used in countries in the region. For example, in India, you have this very famous Aadhaar program, which is a national identification system that was developed by the government to facilitate the provision of basic social services. But now they have actually been improving on it, and they're linking it to your mobile phone. And now with this, you can actually do banking services, which is very useful in terms of livelihood of the people. No? In India also, you have this network of village internet kiosks, which are very useful for rural communities for exchange of information. In Vietnam, you have this crop intelligence company, which is very interesting because it uses AI to help farmers determine the health of their crops by just taking a picture of the plant, and there's some algorithm and analysis, and the farmers would know what would be a problem or if there's any issue with his agricultural products. In Malaysia, you have the door-to-door healthcare, which also uses AI with regard to providing health services. And frontier technologies, very useful in terms of disasters. It can also predict pollution peaks, simulate various scenarios, analyze environmental data. The use of social media can be very useful in disaster risk reduction activities. Now, the government of Korea has been very active in using open data and using data for development and governance. So those are just examples of how digital technologies are useful in various development sectors and in achieving the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. But how do we make this happen? So I have identified here several policy priorities. These are by no means exhaustive. I only picked the ones that are also relating more to the work that we do in APC-ICT. Of course, one area that we need to address is the persistent digital divide. As I mentioned earlier, we are part of the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, which is an intergovernmental body based in Bangkok. And they have an Asia-Pacific Information Superhighway Initiative, which aims to increase the availability and affordability of broadband internet across the region. We also need to focus on human capacity building and workforce training. We need to prepare the generation in a fourth industrial revolution future. Only 2/3 of Asian Pacific countries spend more than 4% of their public expenditures on technology and education. Lack of access to secondary, vocational, and tertiary education, few training programs on ICT skills, and public expenditures on technology and education are not enough. Most of the frontier technologies are actually driven by private companies. So we need to engage the private sector in our sustainable development efforts. In ESCAP, we say that we need to move from this corporate social responsibility thinking into one of a shared value, meaning that companies should now start to integrate the economic, the social, and environmental principles in the management and operation of their businesses. Gender inclusion. Gender is a very important area that we are working in right now. As I mentioned earlier, development that leaves no one behind. And in many countries, women are still neglected. There's gender imbalance that's happening in many countries. There's also a gender divide in terms of the use of ICT. There's less women in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Low levels of skills of women in using ICT. And we need to strengthen the public sector. And this is actually at the heart of the work that we do in APC ICT. Our center was established with a mandate to strengthen the capacities of policymakers and civil servants to leverage ICT for development. Just to briefly introduce to you the work that we do in APC ICT, we have 3 flagship programs. The first one is called the Academy of ICT Essentials for Government Leaders. So this is a training program that's given to policymakers. In fact, this week, our center is conducting a training in Laos together with the Ministry of Post and Telecom. We're doing a training on data-driven governance and another one on ICT and women entrepreneurship. About 3 years ago, we launched this new program called the Women ICT Frontier Initiative. It's basically an ICT program for women entrepreneurs, but it's also targeted to policymakers to strengthen their capacities to formulate ICT-based programs that can help women's economic empowerment. And we have a program also that's targeted to the youth, which we call the Primer Series on ICTD for Youth. So we would like to prepare our future leaders to be ICTD the digital natives to have this development perspective. Now, for the primer program, we do not conduct training directly for students. What we do is we partner closely with universities to enhance the coverage of ICT for development in their curricula. So we develop training modules and knowledge resources that can be used by these universities in classroom teaching. So for the academy program, that's for civil servants, we have these 11 training modules available now, and these are the topics that are covered by that program. Our latest module is on the data-driven governance, which we launched last year and which we now begin to roll out to countries in the region. 36 countries in the region are using the academy program. Our modules are available in 16 languages. We also have an e-learning platform which is available globally. So these are just examples of how the academy training program is being used in countries such as the Philippines, in Myanmar, in Laos, in Cambodia also. We have a very active partnership with the ICT ministries. And for the ICT and Women Entrepreneurship Program, we have 5 modules. So we are teaching women entrepreneurs on how to use ICT to plan and manage their business. And we're also helping policymakers learn more about how to create an enabling environment for ICT-empowered women entrepreneurs. Just to give you one example, in Cambodia, we are partnering with a social enterprise called She Investments. In Cambodia, there are women entrepreneurs who are finding it difficult to apply for loans because the banks would first ask them, can you show me your income and expenses? Very simple request. But many women entrepreneurs in Cambodia are also coming from the informal sector, and they operate on a cash basis. So they are unable to produce this income and expenses spreadsheet. or any evidence of income and expenses. So what we're doing is we're partnering with She Investments to develop a mobile app that can be used by these women entrepreneurs to manage their finances. And in doing so, they would be able to meet the requirements being set by these banks whenever they apply for loans. So these are just the knowledge resources that we have developed for the primer program, and these are being used by colleges and universities in the region. So that concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions if you have anything later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. De Jesus. He's just spoken about how ICT can help us with our sustainable development goals. Before we move on to the next session, I would like to introduce one more guest. We are honored to be joined by His Excellency, Mr. Dato Maud Ashri Muda, the Ambassador of Malaysia to the Republic of Korea. Could you please stand up and we give him a big applause. Thank you very much. Now we will move on to the next session, session number 2. The topic of this session is SDGs and ODA, Official Development Assistance. 2 presentations will be also made back to back. And our first presenter is Dr. Deok-sun Nim, a Senior Research Fellow from the Science and Technology Policy Institute. The title of his talk is Science, Technology, and Innovation, ODA, for the SDGs. Please welcome him with a big applause.
Thank you, Dr. Kim, and also thank you for Korean Federation of Science and Technology Societies. I'm Dr. Im, working at the Science and Technology Policy Institute. I was invited to speak about something about how the Korea and how the STEPI is doing for, science and technology related ODAs. I have some questions before starting this presentation, and I would like to present the concept of the SDGs and the STI ODAs, because there are some very, very diverse views, and also based on the Korean STI development experience, I would like to suggest how Korea should work with the other developing countries. We understand that to achieve the SDG goals, science and technology is quite necessary. And Korea's ODA is now growing, but people are asking, they are conducting Korean style or unique Korean STI ODA. But is that really transferred to other developing countries? That's one of my questions. And then how can we support all Korea's STI ODA? I will skip this because you've been seeing this picture so many times today. 10 Sustainable Development Goals and the 169 target are almost, it has the technology content, science contents. But anyone knows how much or how many percentages of the ODA is being invested in the STI? 50%? 25%? No one knows. Really. So, but people are now started to emphasize that in the ODA, STI has to be, the priorities. But when we do not have any solid data, how can we approach? That's my question. See that Korea's ODA is now very much growing. And the growth of Korea's STI ODA, we have estimated by various ways. I do not want to go in detail how to measure the STI ODAs, but we have exercised that Korea's STI ODA is about it's growing. So we took and also for the Korea's STI model, before Korea's STI model, we have to have Korea's STI development model. Is that possible? Someone saying that 새마을운동, or someone say that, but there is no also clear-cut definition for Korea's model, because when we talk about the model, it means that it can be transferred. It's like you put something in A, then you get the B. That's the model, right? Korea, I think you have seen this kind of graph many times, really grows very fast. In 1970, the per capita GDP was $255. Now, last year, we have reached up to $30,000. Then people think that there are some general consensus that Korea's development was possible because of the education, human resource development, and the other one is STI development. But there is some misunderstanding. STI development is always to support industrial development in Korean cases. And also Korea, if we summarize some characteristics of Korea's development, there is always the awareness from the general public that STI is important. So when Korean government has increased STI budget, no citizens are against such a movement. It's very interesting. If you see that in other countries, when they try to increase the STI budget, there may be some movement or opinions against that. We need more money for our life. Why do we invest in the science or technology, which will take effect in the longer term? So it's very unique in Korean culture. And the Korean government role was very critical. And also, we always emphasize that STI development with industrial development. Not STI for STI only. STI for industrial development. And contrary to the advanced countries' suggestion, Korean government started from the technology and moves to science. We didn't start from the science. It is very, very important. I often travel to other countries, that the ministers or vice ministers in the Ministry of Science and Technology, they always emphasize, we want to have some good science. But I ask, why do you need good science? Korea started from the technologies which support industrial development. Now we reached some stages where we need more fundamental science. So we're slightly shifting to science. That's Korean model. And also Korean government, we established many science and technology infrastructures, SNT universities like KAIST, or government laboratories like KIST, and the STI Park like Daedok Science Town. So we all invested in advance. And also the R&D investment was quite rapid. So we are like a number 1 or number 2 these days that we heavily invest on the, R&D. So this can be seen that how the element of the Korean government science and technology policies. One is good government, one is good policy. We invest in the industry, R&D institute, university, science park. But slowly, we are changing. Private industries takes much more the R&D investment, and we also emphasize the agency role. And the financial institute is one of the weakest area in Korea for science and technology development. I have to confess. And also now regional government is putting more money on the science and technology. So Korea has reached to some state that now we have to be some front runner, and we have to promote creative industries, these kind of things. But there is one fundamental question. Is that Korean model can be copied or transferred to other developing countries? When Korea started to develop, there was no internet. And if Korea, is trying to export, then there is a big, huge market in the US, especially. So it was possible. But now, let me tell you just one symbolic story. I've been working with Nepal with the Koika project, and there I bought one shawl for ladies. Then I thought that it is quite cheap and very good quality. But I was surprised when I landed in Korea. The product was made in China. In Nepal, the labor is cheap, but the product is made in China. Same thing happens in Africa. You go pick up some, product, then you find out it's made in China. So it means that most of the developing countries, they cannot take the same strategies as Korea did. So there's a big problem. And the internet is there. Every young, brilliant people leaving their countries. And the US, UK, they all welcome those people. So they are losing the people. So it's very much dilemma. It's more complex than when Korea started to develop. So we have to really think, seriously. So global environment is now changing, and that also I have to mention that now that in the developing countries, the global multinational companies having so much impact. Sometimes they are, in the behind the political scenes. So this is Korea's policies. I don't want to go for details. But in the STI ODA, there are many stakeholders, UN agencies, NGOs, and I would like to make it, define what is the STI ODA. STI ODA can be grouped into 3 areas. One is STI ODA for STI itself, like human resource development for researchers, or public, university, private sector R&D promotions, those kind of things, or establishing some science and technology parks, or promoting venture capitals, they are all STI-related ODAs. But there is another area, STI ODA for industry. I grouped this, well, it has no theoretical background. It's from my experience. I often go to many developed countries. They ask those things, you know, like a textile, one of the light industries, which you can start very easily for the industrial development, energy, food. The food means that food processing, actually. It's not really for agriculture. Many developing countries ask food processing technologies, of course, IT communication, environment. Then there are other groups, STI ODA for society purposes, social welfare, like health, water, education, housing, city, culture. That's STI ODA for societies. But we have to have a different concept, because STI ODA is very, very unique. So we have to have a very different approach. It's not like just building the bridge, building the buildings, because the STI is like a cross-cutting issues. It relates with water, energy, environment, industries, and also technology innovation process is very complex in nature. And also it cannot be sometimes seen. It's intangible. And also it takes lots of time, long period of time to get the result. So it's very difficult to measure whether it produces really good result or not. So because of this kind of complex characteristics, I think that people, even though people understand the importance of the STI ODA, they are not really focusing on it. And STEPI, Science and Technology Policy Institute, is taking some holistic approach. We are doing ODA for STI policy consulting normally. So it's like a planning, consulting. But we connect other partners, sometimes international agencies, sometimes Korean universities, sometimes Korean public laboratories, to conduct or to implement that project. This is one example. STEPI, we supported the STI university plan in Ethiopia, also technology park and incubator assistance, also STI national roadmaps and the master plan. This is one example. STEPI conducted for Algeria with the COICA assistance. Long time ago, I supported Algeria to make the master plan for Sidi Abdallah Science and Technology Town. So it was the program. Now they have established that agency, ANPT, for national promotion of the development of science technology. So I would like to conclude that Korean model is worse, but we have to explore more. And we have to think how we can apply Korean model to other countries. Why? Because I often found out that, whenever I worked with the officials in the developing countries, they express that Korean experience is unique. And that they feel a little bit easy with the Korean experience. I think that personally, that when they see the experience of UK, US, or Japan, that experience is too far from them. But they feel that Korea, they can do it. when they see the Korean experiences. That's very unique. So I think if we have some sort of a deeper study and accumulate more experience, that we can develop a Korean model and approach other developing countries. Because I see that like international agencies or multi-development bank, sometimes it seems that they are talking about the paradise, heaven. But Korean people have the experience, living experience. There are still, even for me, I understand when you know, I had the first electric light in my home. I was shocked. Really, I was lighting oil lamp in childhood in the countryside, but I was shocked. I remember that when I first saw the TV in the children, I thought that there are some people living inside. So we had such an experience. We can work with the other, and also, I think Korean people understand what's the red tape, what's the bureaucracies, which is, you know, common in developed countries. So they can work with it. I mean, I don't say that give some pride, but we can work. We understand, right? And we understand what's the being poor means. So I think even though there are lots of barriers in you know, Korea, also in other developing countries, we can overcome those barriers. So you know, again, I suggested some holistic approach. So I think also we need some real people who understand the both experience, you know, recipient country and the Korean experience, because there are lots of gaps. And I also, you know, suggested for Korean government to make some sort of international platform, like in Africa, for STI, Korea, Africa, STI, Oda, some collaboration center, something like that. So we can work with the other agencies too. Thank you.
Dr. Im has spoken about the limitations and possibilities of the transferability of the Korean STI model for ODA. And thank you very much, Dr. Im. Hope you enjoy, hope you stay here with us for the panel discussion. The next speaker is Dr. Young-woo Park, Mr. Young-woo Park, sorry. Mr. Park is the former regional director of UNEP, Regional Office of Asia and the Pacific. The title of his book is Ways to Improve ODA to Implement the Sustainable Development Goals. May we invite him to the stage. Please give him a warm applause.
Good afternoon, Excellencies and distinguished guests, speakers, and especially the students, Korean students and international students studying in Korea. My topic is ways to improve ODA to implement SDGs. This is from my experience, and so some of my presentation might be possibly offended by the excellencies and the distinguished guests from developing countries, and also some students. So it is in some sense intentional to provoke it and challenge, so I can have a lively discussion with you all, and so we can find the solutions, better solutions to achieve SDGs together. Okay, next please. Okay, so first let's start with the challenges that we have. Why has the ODA effectiveness been making slow progress even after the development of Paris Declaration and Accra Agenda for Action and the Busan Declaration? And also, why has ODA been slow in making transformative and substantial differences? I'm focusing on transformative and substantial differences and contributing to sustainable development. And why have some of the developing countries has been successful in making transformative differences in economic and social development, and some have not? And what are the factors that have made differences in the countries which have been successful in making differences and sustainable implementation of ODA programs? I think this includes the Korea's experience as well. So there is a general challenges that the developing countries are facing. Well, first, lack of capacities, which includes lack of human capacities and the lack of institutional capacities. Especially this institutional capacity is the problem. And that is one of the challenges that the international institutions, especially UN agencies, faced with. UN agencies, by its mandate, is focusing on the capacity building, but it is focused on primarily, so far, slowly there is a slight the change, but on the human level capacity building. And I will discuss with you why it is the problem. So anyway, lack of institutional capacity and the lack of managerial, operational, data management capacity, and also lack of technologies. You heard about the technologies, and the lack of financial resources. And importantly, another one is the lack of governance. As you have seen, implementation mechanisms and no PDCA means no monitoring and review and improvement process and the systems and so on. So it is on the proceedings, so you can refer in detail for more details the proceedings. And previous, can you go back, please? Back. And the lack of political leadership, lack of genuine will and commitment for change and for people. Okay, at the international fora, they say, we care for the sustainable development, we care for the people and so on, but there is no genuine will and commitment. And the lack of measurable and comparable data, and the coexistence of 20th and 21st century problems. There was a short mention about the difference between what Korea had when Korea was just like many of developing countries today, and what today's developing countries are facing. So there is a huge differences. Anyway, they have 20th century and 21st century problems. And the details you can refer. And this Paris Declaration and Busan Declaration is I'm emphasizing this because unless we find ways to improve aid effectiveness, and also unless we find real implementation of what suggested by the Paris Declaration and the Busan Declaration, then we will not make any changes and differences. Okay? That's why I'm emphasizing. And so the principles listed, then agreed by the member countries in Paris Declaration and Busan Declaration is that, and more details. Ownership is to set development strategies and improve institutions, tackle corruption, and tailor to country-specific situation and needs. And it is, in some sense, make it demand-driven, not the donor-driven, but demand-driven. Okay? And alignment. This means we have to align the strategies and the donor countries' programs and so on. It is to fit into the country-specific situations. So we have to align all the programs. And harmonization. Donor countries and organizations coordinate their actions and simplify procedures and share information to avoid duplication. Duplication was mentioned, and duplication is a serious challenge, making the aid program be more efficient and managing for results and focused on results. And the mutual accountability, both donor countries and also the partner countries accountable for their action, and inclusive development partnership. It is stakeholder engagement is part of this, and transparency and accountability to each other, not to the donor and the partner countries. And underlying concepts considered developing these principles is 4A. One is applicability. Second, appropriateness and adaptability and affordability. Is these policies or technologies affordable by the developing countries? Okay. Can it be applicable? Is it appropriate to the systems, to the culture, and all these country specifics? Okay. And can they afford? Do they have necessary means to implement the suggested, recommended, developed strategies and transferred technologies? And so far, to achieve for the ODA program has taken this architecture. One is the traditional one, North-South cooperation. But North-South cooperation has many challenges, and so come out with the South-South cooperation today, and also triangular cooperation. Triangular is North, South, and emerging economies, countries like Korea, who has still elements of developing countries, has better understanding of the situation in developing countries. And so a triangular architecture for official development programs. So we already have Paris Declaration and Busan Declaration, all this what to do and how to make ODA be more effective and so on, but it hasn't making any progress. And then how can we make it better? And how can we make it to achieve sustainable development goals by 2030? So implement the Paris Declaration and Busan Declaration and the Accra Agenda for Action, because actually whatever we discuss in different international fora after Paris Declaration and the Busan Declaration Paris and a little bit the focusing is different, but the solution is there. The solution is there. The challenge is that it is not implemented. That's the problem. So it is still relevant. And promote further triangular cooperation and public-private partnership. Because North, so-called traditional developed countries, they forgot what their country was like when they were in developing countries. But countries like Korea, we still remember how we were, as it was expressed by Dr. Lim and also myself. I know how it was like. Okay? And so that will make more the policies that fit into customized and tailored policies and the implementation mechanisms. And reform and improve Korea Senior Advisor Program. This is what the Korean government is doing. Retired government officers and the private sector, the people after retirement, they go to the developing countries to help to assist them to develop their policies or sometimes the business plans and so on. And although there are many improvements has to be made, and I think it is a very good program. And also establish the stakeholder roundtable and platform for sustainable development. From my experience, although Paris Declaration and the Busan Declaration suggests that set the national platform for the stakeholder engagement in policy making and implementation stage, but not many countries has it, and even if they do have it, it doesn't work the way it's supposed to be. But my personal experience when I was advising at one of the countries in the Asia Pacific region, and nobody knows what each other is doing. For example, Environmental Ministry and Industry Ministry and Urban Development Ministry, they all have environment-related activities, but they don't know what each other is doing. And stakeholders, they don't know what they should do, and so on. And so I bring all the stakeholders, and we have a once-a-month meeting, and I let them find out their problem, identify their problems, solutions, and implementation mechanisms, and the necessary means to achieve these policies. And so it was worked very well, and so I suggest this to make ODA program will be more effective and efficient. And strengthen sub-regional development assistance program. Sub-regions has its own intergovernmental bodies. Most of sub-regions has it. And sharing experience and mutual learning have more relevant to each other, because sub-region, they have more commonality than different global level and regional level, and can create environment for well-being, well-intentioned competition, and can solve common challenges, and integrate capacity building, technical transfer, and financing program together. It goes separate. For example, UN agencies, as I said, focusing on the capacity building. But, okay, I know now how to set, say, waste management policy or climate change related policies. But if I do not have technologies, if I do not have financial resources, it's meaningless. You just have a knowledge that cannot exercise. And so it has to go together rather than going separate. and also strengthen institutional capacity and find a way to stop brain drainage in developing countries. It was mentioned, brain drainage is a serious challenge, and so it has to be, we have to find a way how to stop this. Okay? And SDGs set universal targets, as it was mentioned. Okay? So it set act as a compass toward achieving sustainable development. But, however, our biggest challenges are how to modify and develop, localize comprehensive master implementation plans and strategies to ultimately achieve SDG by 2030 in all developing countries. Okay. It has to be demand-driven, it has to be customized, and so we know why SDG is important. That's why we developed SDGs. Why sustainable development is important. That's why we developed SDGs. And we know what to do. It sets 17 goals and 169 targets. Right? But question is how to do it. And this how has to be customized and tailored solutions, not top-down, given by someone else. And so all the programs you have, it doesn't matter how good your policies, how good your technologies and so on, when you transfer this, you have to make it, you have to help the people. For example, say it is Vietnam, then it has to be made by Vietnamese, for the Vietnamese. And our role is sometimes facilitation and catalyzing, and if necessary, provoking and guiding. That's our role. Cannot just write a report and give it and leave. It will not work. So we have to change the way we work with developing countries. Otherwise, we will not achieve SDGs. And also, I will ask all, especially those from developing countries, think about why some of the developing countries are now advancing, why some are not. Okay. In Korea, of course, we had many challenges and so on, but leadership with vision and leadership with commitment for the people, that is very important. And you have to build, although it doesn't have to be perfect, necessary institutions, and also you have to bring the people to work. Unless you have these three, the outside assistance will not make a difference. It is a necessary, but it is not sufficient condition to achieve sustainable development goals and to make a transformative and substantial differences. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Park, for giving us a wonderful presentation about the necessity of customized, demand-driven implementation for the achievement of the SDGs. Before we move on to a coffee break at 3:20, we would like to wrap up this session with the previous 4 speakers and have a discussion session here. And I would like to invite Dr. Sugil Yang as the moderator for this discussion. Dr. Yang is currently the chairman of Sustainable Development Solutions Network. Dr. Yang, please come to the stage, and I would also like to invite the 4 speakers.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I want to speak from this podium for the first a couple of minutes before joining the panelists and launch discussions. But before that, Dr. Kim, where is Dr. Kim? Kim Hyung-ha? No, this is a simple question. Did you say that there will be coffee served during the break? I was quite thirsty for coffee, and I came out of the venue to find the coffee. There was none. So I wonder if you really are preparing to serve coffee for us. So think about that. Right. Now, by the way, I was said to be chairing the Sustainable Development Solutions Network Korea, which is the Korean branch of a global network of experts in various issue areas of sustainable development. That global network was created by then Secretary General Ban Ki-moon in 2012, who appointed Professor Jeffrey Sachs of Columbia University to be the local director of this global network. I was invited to serve on the Leadership Council for that global network, and in that capacity, I launched the Korean chapter of SDSN in 2012, and now I'm serving as chairman. Now, let me first make a few remarks to set the background to the discussions to follow. First, the purpose of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development is for all member governments of the United Nations to transform their development paradigms by 2030. Broaden the purpose of development, or the concept of development itself, from one of primarily seeking economic growth to realization of sustainable development, tempering economic growth with pursuit of social inclusiveness and environmental sustainability. The ultimate purpose of doing so is to realize good and sustainable societies on Earth. Good in the sense of promoting social inclusiveness and people's well-being, and sustainable in the sense of keeping the planetary environment safe and available to serve the needs of all future generations to come, including those young people who are among us in this room. And secondly, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals at the core of the 2030 Agenda constitute the checklist of the developmental goals to be achieved to make this transformation and address social, economic, environmental, and governance dimensions of sustainable development. Implementing the SDGs present a huge and complex challenge, as shown by the 169 constituent targets which nations have to implement in order to implement the 17 goals, which in turn requires social, technological, and political innovations. STI, or science, technology, and innovation, are key in achieving those SDGs. STI is a sustainable development goal on its own, as embodied by Sustainable Development Goal number 9, but it is also a means to achieve most of the other Sustainable Development Goals. Third, the theme of this conference is how the community of scientists and engineers, especially of the Republic of Korea, should actively participate in the implementation of the SDGs at the global level through STI-based international cooperation, and how, in particular, the Korea Federation of Scientists and Science and Technology, this host institutions networking programs for young scientists and engineers, such as YGF and YPF, may be deployed for this purpose. Section 1 addresses the question of how STI should contribute to the implementation of the SDGs. The two presentations discuss the role of STI with particular focus on ICT in implementing the SDGs. Session 2 addresses how high-income countries, such as the Republic of Korea, should help low-income countries with STI in implementing the SDGs. Now, fourth, we have heard two presentations by prominent experts on each of the two topics. In this discussion to follow, we would like to engage those experts here in discussion with one another and with all those in the audience here for a further exploration of the following specific issues or questions. First, the priority areas of the goals and targets of SDGs in which STI and in particular ICT should contribute with a focus on possible contribution by Korea. Secondly, specific obstacles for development in low-income countries with Korea's ODA should strategically target in view of the SDGs. And thirdly and finally, what critiques we may have of the community of scientists and engineers, as well as COICA, in terms of their responses to the SDGs. Have they been responding to this challenge or not? If not, in what aspects? Now, we have been given close to 40 minutes for this discussion. I now would like to begin by asking each speaker here for a 2-minute summary answer to those 3 questions that I've posed. But before that, and only 2 minutes each, not a second more. But before that, let me pose a question to the general participants here. Those of you who represent the young generation as participants in the 2 forums, please raise your hands. How many of you represent that community of young scientists and engineers? Please? Not as many I thought there could be. How many of you are from other countries than Korea? Okay, we have quite a few. That's a very good news. And finally, I have like to ask at least 3 of you the following question. What, if any, have you picked up or learned from 4 presentations that you have heard thus far? You may name just 1 or 2 or 3, or instead you may raise questions instead of letting us know what you have learned from listening to those speakers. So please raise your hand. Anyone? Okay, the bravest young men out there, please. You need a microphone. Please bring microphone. Quickly. No, you should speak into the microphone. Microphone, please. Okay, there comes one. Please first identify yourself.
I'm Shubh Ronil. I'm studying currently in KAIST.
I'm sorry?
I'm Shubh Ronil from Bangladesh. But I'm studying in KAIST. I'm in my 3rd year undergrad student. I had a question. I was listening to all the presentations. Thank you for the, I've learned a lot.
What have you learned in particular? 1 or 2 important things.
I was not aware about I was aware about SDG, and I've been reading about all that, but I was not aware about SDI. So, when I was listening to Professor Park, Young-woo Park's presentation, I had one question that struck in my mind. There are a lot of high-level, decisions and policies that are taken in a higher level, but when those are being implemented and when there are funds and all that being allocated, I feel that many of these developing countries, one of the biggest problems that has not been addressed was field level corruption. So you were telling about how you have worked, for example, in Indonesia, and how leadership affects and all that, but what about corruption and its effect? How can we solve that? Because, I'm not sure if that's relevant to the topic, but I really had this question in my mind.
Are we asking a question about the role of corruption in development process or in implementing the ODA in particular?
Yes, implementing the ODA.
ODA.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Is that all? Thank you very much.
Yeah, that's all.
Okay, thank you. I would like to hear at least from two more young delegates here. Okay, over there. Please.
Thank you.
Over here, okay.
My name is Wonderson from KAIST. I don't consider
But more originally, from which country are you from?
from Ethiopia.
Huh?
Ethiopia.
Okay.
Yes. And I don't consider myself young, so. But I will take the question. I'll ask the question. It's directed to Professor Park and Dr. Yim. In the presentation of, in the last presentation, it's provocative, yes, but it was not offensive. So it was provocative. It's good. We were expecting the offensive part. We didn't get it. Anyways, you put general challenge in developing countries, many problems. That's nice. And I was expecting, so which one to tackle? And at the end, in the closing remarks, you come up with three. Very good 3 points. Leadership and institutions engagement. So which one do you consider a critical out of the three? There is a reason why I'm asking this question. The first one is leadership, as you said, vision from Korea's experience, institution, and people's engagement. In my thoughts, I consider critical that by answering one, you can answer all. So for me, leadership is critical. If there is a visionary leadership, institution can be in place, engagement also will be there, but not vice versa. But what is your opinion? Which one is critical? Is it leadership?
Thank you. Yeah.
Just one moment, just one moment. And if so, are you suggesting that ODA from Korea should be preconditioned with the idea that if there is no leadership with a vision from the recipient side, you shouldn't do it? Is that the suggestion, or what is the suggestion? I'm trying to be provocative. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for interesting questions. At least one more intervention from the floor. Anyone from among Korean students? Or Korean young men here? Koreans, one problem with the Korean youth is that they are very shy. Okay. Wonderful to have a lady speak up from the floor. Thank you.
So, hi, I'm Anna. I'm a biochemistry undergraduate student. I've just graduated and I study at Imperial in London. So first of all, when you asked the question of what is one thing that you've learned from the presentations from today, for me what really marked me positively is that the assets that Korea has as being a country that has really developed economically very quickly over the past few decades, from being a very poor country to a world leader today. I think that's a very important point to highlight, and that is a huge asset for Korea, and makes it a very important role player to then further help other countries, as all the presenters have accurately highlighted, thanks to Korea's previous experience, and so they understand the current situations of the current developing countries very well. In highlight of that, kind of starting from that point, I had a question to ask. So I was wondering, since the people, the Korean leaders currently, who very well understand such struggles that the developing countries are facing, are people of kind of, if I may say, of higher age, how would you transmit such knowledge and such experience to the younger generation, so us, the young generation today, so that we can then further use your experience and knowledge of Korea's development to be able to use that using STIs and help other developing countries and help our country develop even further as a world leader, essentially. I hope that was clear as a question. Thank you.
That's an interesting question. How would you, as a senior members of expert community of Korea, would you transfer whatever knowledge and insights and experiences that you have gathered to younger generation Koreans. Okay, thank you very much. I will now move back to my by asking those four panelists for their 2-minute answers to 3 of the questions that I have posed. You don't have to answer all 3. You may choose to focus 1 or 2. And the 3 questions were, first, what are the priority areas of the goals and targets in which STI and especially ICT should contribute with a focus on possible contribution by Korea? What priority areas of the SDG goals and targets in which STI should be making contributions? Secondly, what specific obstacles for development in low-income countries should Korea's ODA target strategically in order to help those countries make progress toward the SDGs? And thirdly, what critics or criticisms or whatever comments do you have about the Korean community of scientists and engineers, as well as of the KOICA itself? So how should I begin? Maybe I should begin with following the order listed in the program. Maybe I should first ask Professor Park Kyung-yeol from KAIST. Where is Professor Park? Okay, you are there.
Okay. Thank you very much, for, Ambassador Yang, as well as your questions. I think I was expecting, I really interested in the listening to your own voice. So what is the kind of real meaning of SDGs or development in your own context? But it seems like we got multiple questions from the floors. So I think global problem requires global action. So SDGs, or disaster management, human rights issues, refugees, etc. These global challenges are best addressed through the universal education as well as universal experiences altogether for the international cooperation. So in this sense, the role of university and then this kind of experiences for students to exposure to these global challenges. So I think this will be great exposure for the young leaders, will be a great asset to think about the localization of this universal problem in the development sector. And in terms of critics, okay, so I think briefly speaking, I have like 3 or 4 comments. Maybe in terms of Korea ODA policy, I think I would be very critical. I can also be a devil's advocate for other speakers. So first of all, fragmentation issues. And second, we need to think about beyond ODA, because ODA doesn't necessarily represent all the development issue. And also, what kind of strategies of Korea we are having as emerging donors, and prioritize and focus in terms of strategy, cooperation sector. So fragmentation is quite shameful because there's a lack of coordination. So we already discussed about kind of this coordination issues among stakeholders, but even in Korea, in governance structure, there's a lack of coordination between ministers and other government agencies, and that's quite shameful. And then also, in the context of Korea, we always talk about ODA, but ODA is quite old concept. So it has been criticized in academia and also development practitioners field for a long time. And Maybe development finance is much better, but among development finance, ODA is very limited. So we need to think about kind of combining the discussion with the national development strategy. What do you mean by development? And is it like more we are focusing on the economic growth still, or we are focusing about social, political development, etc.? Should I wrap up, right? If I have 20, that's a fragmentation issue.
Fragmentation of the programs of
Exactly.
Secondly,
Second is we need to think beyond ODA, because ODA is a concept. As a concept, it doesn't represent the whole picture of development. So development is kind of big picture. It also includes sustainable development as well. But ODA, actually, in terms of total amount of development finance, it only represents 40%, so because it is excluded China and India, and then other emerging actors like private sector engagement, etc. So that's why we need to think about kind of broad governance structure in terms of development cooperation. And third point is, as an emerging donor, what kind of voice can we have in the development global field of aid? Because it seems like we're just receiving kind of universally agreed international development agenda, so without any kind of consideration of context. So as an emerging donor, so do we follow the traditional donor path, or are we competing with China or Japan? What kind of our strategy, our own strategy in terms of this development cooperation? And then focus and prioritize the sectors and countries, because we kind of, do Korean government, we do like every single kind of international corporations in terms of development, different sectors and different countries. We're covering more than 60 countries. So this is not very prioritized. That's kind of for kind of critics in terms of Korea ODA policy. Then I will also follow the other
Professor
points.
Park was saying, as I understand, that Korea needs to develop its own philosophy, vision, and priorities for its ODA policies. Thank you very much. Now, let me move on to invite Mr. Jesus. How do you pronounce your name? Huh? Jesus. Okay. Do I pronounce D-E or not? Jesus. Okay, Mr. Jesus. You are wrong. Jesus.
It's yes. It's the Jesus. It's a Hispanic name.
Yes, please. Yeah.
Yes. I think with regard to the question on the particular goal where we can focus the contribution of ICT, I spoke earlier about this Women ICT Frontier Initiative. It's a training program on ICT for women entrepreneurs that we are doing in APC ICT. And we think that economic empowerment of women actually has a lot of development benefits. It's empirically proven that women who are economically empowered, particularly in developing countries, are actually better able to provide health for their children, education for their children. They're able to have better living conditions for the family. And it's because of these ripple effects that we can see whenever women are economically empowered that we think that we really should focus on making them part of our development efforts. So I think it's a very good area that perhaps Korea in its ODA can really focus more on because of its ripple effects in society, the women's economic empowerment. One other comment that I would like to make is that whenever we go to developing countries promoting the use of digital technologies in their programs, there's this thinking that we people outside the country have the solutions. No, we should stop parachuting technologies to other countries. And in fact, related to this women entrepreneurship program that we are doing in APC-ICT, I went to one developing country, and this country actually has a very vibrant IT sector that can develop local apps, mobile apps, and they have the skills and capability to do it. But why is it not happening? And I think this is where the comment from Mr. Park comes in, this facilitating role. And it's not really happening in developing countries where government and the other stakeholders, the other beneficiaries, they're not really talking to each other. One example is that there's this government that established a Women Entrepreneurship Development Fund. It's actually a fund being made available to aspiring women entrepreneurs. But when we spoke to the Women Entrepreneur Association of that country, they do not know what are the procedures to apply for that fund. And what happened, interestingly, is that this Women Entrepreneur Association came up with a Facebook page. And in that Facebook, they're using social media to share information among women entrepreneurs on how to apply for that fund. Now, why did it take a Women Entrepreneur Association to do this when in fact the government itself should be able to do this? So why are the two not talking? So I think this is where Mr. Park's comment earlier about this facilitating role, the provoking role. And it's really important that we have this in the country because the solutions may be there already. It's just that these people are not seeing eye to eye. So I think that concludes my comment.
Mr. Jesus, could you elaborate your first point about Korea's possible focus on economic empowerment? What specifically do you have in mind as solutions?
I mean in helping countries with regard to women's economic empowerment. So in APC-ICT, that's what we are doing. We see that the ICT tools can actually help women entrepreneurs better manage their businesses. And for those who are aspiring to be women entrepreneurs, ICT can be very useful also.
Thank you, Mr. Jesus. I'm very comfortable with the new pronunciation of your name now, Mr. Jesus. Now, Dr. Im Deok-sun about, yes, okay.
Okay, thank you. For the first question of priorities in STI, I think ICT is quite relevant because it provided the transparency, also it provide the information so that people can survive on that. But I would put a little bit more. Well, as I said that there are technologies for society, there are technologies for industries. To be sustainable enough, I would call it the technology which generates some economic value. That should be some major key point in any countries. Otherwise, any country, the recipient country cannot survive. So it's very important how to make it the technology transferred to create the economic value. Number two is that for the low-income countries, of course, that I think that the economic value generating technology is important. For the KOICA and also Korean Federation of Science and Technology Societies, I think especially for KOICA and other Korean government agency programs, there are lots of debate at the policy level. I think, but another important point neglected is the management level, the project management. And we need lots of skills to develop the expert who can really carry out those projects. You know, like we can say, for example, we can say that we have to coordinate the shareholders, stakeholders' interest. Well, it's very easy to say in theory, but it all depends on the project management skills of the expert. If we do not have such an expert, especially in science and technology field, you cannot really carry out. We talk about the appropriate technologies, but to make the appropriate technology available, we have to persuade those people in the communities. It takes lots of process, a lot of effort. So without talking about the project management and the expert in those skills, it will be meaningless. That's my point. And I would like to comment on the questions for the young ladies for how to transfer the technologies in the developing countries. I think in today, if my experience is correct, the developing countries, there are lots of brilliant technology people, especially, through the educational opportunities in overseas. There are lots of people. It's not like the 60s in Korea. So I think that how to connect them with the Korea and how to mobilize those peoples will be the critical. So we can make some project, inviting them in Korea or making some collaborative program with them. For example, for the startup program, Korea, we have lots of technologies. So we can provide those technologies to the young technology people in developing countries so they can work together. I think we have to develop those ideas more, and it will be one of the ways to transfer Korean technology. Thank you.
Thank you. So we should give more focus on transferring value-creating or practical technologies to developing countries, and the donor institutions in Korea should improve the project management skills in delivering projects in developing countries, including in the area of STI. And thirdly, we should improvise or develop better mechanisms for technology transfer. So Dr. Lin is very much focused on the issue of technology transfer. Thank you. And now, finally, Dr. Park Young-woo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, with regard to the Korean ODA program or any development assistance program, I think one of the fundamental problems that there is no comprehensive national policy and plan for ODA. That is the problem. KOICA has its own program, but KOICA is mostly technical assistance, which is capacity building. Of course, they do have a small grant, but it is not enough to have to give an assistance to the developing countries needed. And then here is a import and export bank, which managing the EDCF, okay, Economic Development Cooperation Fund, okay, which has the financing, the infrastructure building, and so on. And these are operated in a silo manner. There is no collaboration, no cooperation, so on. Why? Because there is no comprehensive national plan, policy, and strategies. So I think it's time to set that as we increase the amount ODA. And SDI and SDG, I can think of any of the priority areas. Of course, to me, if we smartly deal with climate change issues, because since all the SDGs seems independent, but they are interconnected. They are interconnected, and I see this the climate change issue can cover all other issues, but Korea is not the right country because itself does not still have domestic climate change, appropriate climate change policies and so on. And so I think in the short term, maybe the focusing on the food and forestation and economic development and poverty eradication, and that we have done very well, focusing on that area. And then as the short term and the long term, climate change and all these the long term challenges we could deal with. And in response to the questions, first Bangladesh, corruption and ODA implementation. Well, yes, it's very closely linked, and especially when we think about effectiveness and efficiency. And so let me start with, there's a joke among the UN staff in Bangkok. Okay, there was a ministerial level meeting, developing country ministerial level meeting held in Bangkok. And so one of the minister, Thai minister, invited the ministers from the minister from Africa to his home, and with the dinner and the nice the wines and so on. And then African the minister was surprised. God, how minister lives so well and wealthy and so on. And so the Thai minister said, "Can you see the bridge over there?" And then African minister couldn't see any bridges over there. And then, "No, I can see it." And Thai minister said, "That's why." Because it's kind of corruption we're describing. And then this minister was invited to
Dr.
in Africa.
Park, please watch the time.
Yes,
the
he
the
didn't
time.
say anything.
We only have less than 3 minutes.
I know. But you didn't say anything the 2 times. He said the 2 minutes, but didn't say anything. Now you're saying it. And so it is unfair. So please. Okay, I will try to finish it short. And so went to Africa, and African minister invited the Thai minister to his home, and another dinner and so on. And so he said, "Oh wow, you're rich, and how?" And then he said, "Can you see the highways over there?" He said, "No, I couldn't. That's how." Okay, so it's serious, but I think so it comes down to Ethiopia questions, leadership and the institution and engagement. So I think leadership with vision for the country and for the people, I think it is very important, very important. I think you can see that in, I think the current example is China, okay, China. And so that's my answer to you, and also and then also you said, if they don't have such a necessary conditions, okay, then should we continue ODA, stop ODA? Answer is still, we have to continue, but we have to build, by building trust, I think we can overcome such the corruption issues and all other issues. Thank you.
Well, you have used most of the remaining time, Dr. Park. But anyway, I didn't invite you to answer questions from the students. I was going to invite all the panelists to answer them later on, but you did it anyway. And anyway, the first first speaker, Dr. Park Byung-yo, he focused on the power of open data. And I think that's a very important point. If you don't have any data, you cannot meaningfully pursue implementation of any goals. And now we are in the era of data revolution, and we have to help developing countries fully exploit the power of open data in pursuing whatever developmental goals they have, including the SDGs. And Dr. Park also mentioned as a problem lack of aid transparency and coordination. Mr. Jesus, he focused on the problems of persistent digital divide. One of the speakers made the point that technological progress is good for development. I don't think that is really the case. Look at what happened following the Industrial Revolution. Industrial Revolution empowered early Western countries who rode the wave of industrial development early on, and what they did with that, they came out to Africa in the so-called scramble for Africa, colonizing them, enslaving them, and exploiting their all natural resources. And then Japan followed those guys, and then Japan colonized South Korea. And the same thing happened in Southeast Asia. All this because of technological divide, and we should do our best to have low-income countries today not fall behind this new wave of technological progress, including breakthrough technologies. So the importance of technological divide, and in particular digital divide. And he identified as priorities the training, offering training programs for human capacity building, and also he, I think, advocated assistance in order to support the private sector engagement in the developmental process. And Dr. Im Dok-sun, I think his point was that Korea should try to transfer Korea's experiences with STI development for the benefit of less developed countries. And there he mentioned the particular problem of brain drain. It would have been better if he had followed up on that issue with the fact that Korea overcame that by inducing brain gain by attracting Korean scientists and others who are trained in the Western countries, especially the United States, back to Korea through creation of various think tanks. I think that was a very successful initiative. And he, in particular, ended his presentation with the proposal of creation of STI cooperation, creation of international platform for STI cooperation. And I think this proposal echoed in other speakers' proposals as well. And finally, Dr. Park Young-hoo, he basically he identified a number of what he called general challenges. I think that was a complete list of problems facing developing countries in general. And so these problems are not quite specific to the pursuit of ODA. But I think his point here underlines the fact that what we should be focused about is how to promote development itself. And then we need a vision and strategy and plans for the development of developing countries, including for implementation of SDGs, and then look for specific roles to be played by ODA in particular. And he emphasized the need for investing in such infrastructures as education and public health, and he emphasized the importance of a coherent vision and plans for development, as well as enhancing the effectiveness of the government per se, in terms of interministerial cooperation and coordination. And I think he also emphasized the utmost importance of political leadership itself. And but I would like to sort of, time is up already, but let me ask this one final question to all the speakers here. Why are you raising your hand? Yes. I'm sorry? Okay, I'll do that, but I was going to ask this question to the panelists. Is ODA really important? Korea itself was not an extensive recipient of ODA. It was primarily the domestic engine of development which propelled Korea forward. And I think ODA, in a sense, played a marginal role in the Korean experiences, except in some areas such as education and manpower training, including through the SNU project from Minnesota University and so on, through which we utilized foreign assistance. So we may have to have some strategic role to assign to ODA, not in very broader terms. But as you say, let me invite, I'm sorry, Dr. Kim, I will override that the clock, and invite at least 2 to 3 questions from the floor. Okay, you have one, please.
I recently finished my job, project management.
Microphone, yeah.
And before this, I have experienced 12 years ODA experience with the assistance of KOICA and other Korean ministry. Recently, just I finished my project manager job in Ethiopia. And this is a rural development project in Amara area. So regarding this, I learned a lot from these sessions. A lot of the lessons I have to apply lately. Regarding this, number one factor, as the Bangladesh person indicate, I think corruption is also very important. I do not elaborate with this. I think it is very certain because one social scientist analyzed all the project, and was because he assumed that usually the developed model copied from Western country. But we are applying this usually Asia and Africa. In Africa and Asia, if you put the single factor as the corruption, all the explanatory model finish itself. So I do not go over more. But my question, strict question from now, how to implement more effectively and efficiently for the development program as SDGs and as science, technology, innovation same. Regarding this, I want one single question with Dr. Dawson Nim. So I want to learn what is the, you mentioned about the project leaders' importance. So I want to learn from you, with your experience, can you indicate one single, very successful development field project in Asia and Africa? That's my question.
Please introduce yourself. Who are you?
I said, I just finished.
Who are you? Your name?
I am Dr. Kim Jae-ho, as currently used as Vice President of the Industrial Development in Korea.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so my question is to the...
Yes, you have said that. You have said that. Thank you.
Please indicate...
2 more interventions, please.
Okay.
More interventions? Okay, if there is no more hands raised from the floor, let me, in regard to the corruption, let me also add my question on that. I think it is a matter of a good governance, how to establish a good governance architecture. And that architecture building should start with designing and building a good governance architecture for implementation of the SDGs. And the UN document on 2030 agenda itself has a prescription for what kind of architectural arrangement we do need for good governance on SDGs. First, establish targets and indicators. Secondly, establish strategies and policies to implement the targets by 2030, and introduce a mechanism or process of review and follow-up on the implementation of SDGs by indicators year by year. And second, and this is the most important, make this mechanism of follow-up and review open, transparent, democratic, and evidence-based or data-based. I think that is probably one way of addressing the problem of corruption. And for the purpose of institutional architecture, we have to create horizontal network as well as a vertical coordination mechanism, and public-private partnership, especially active participation by the private sector and stakeholders is of vital importance, and especially the civil society and the stakeholders should be encouraged to make contributions, and that's a key way of keeping this process as little corrupt as possible. Now, may I invite our panelists to make your final statements?
Could I just respond in like 10 seconds to the questions?
Yes,
could I use it? Okay. So I don't think any kind of successful and partially successful development project in the past can be simply applied or implemented in any kind of different context. So I don't think Korea case, arguably, which is successful in terms of economic growth, cannot be generalized to the other cases. In terms of successful, thank you very much for your questions again. So in terms of the best practice or relatively successful case, we discussed about Algerian Innovation City, and then I also discussed about the Kenya Innovation the sector. So if you look at the Rwanda, the Kigali Innovation City Center is...
Can you make it short?
Yes, it's very successful. So that's why it's quite complex, because they have been experiencing authoritarian regime, but at the same time it's very efficient in terms of governance structure. Thank you very much.
I think we have to go on to coffee break. It's already end of coffee break time.
Okay,
so hope you enjoyed your coffee. We will now continue our conference, starting with session number 3. The topic of session number 3 is Sustainable Development Goals and Future Generation. Let me introduce our speaker here. It is my pleasure to introduce the speaker for this session, Dr. Spencer Short. He is the CSO of Institut Pasteur Korea, and the title of his presentation is Pasteur International Network, 130 Years of Basic Science Applied to the Benefit of Public Health. Please give him a big hand.
So good afternoon, everybody. I'm very pleased to be here, to have the opportunity to speak. Thank you for the invitation to the organizers, to the KOFST committee. I'm discovering about the organization to the KOFST. It's very exciting. And thank you especially to Hung Ha Kim for the invitation to bring me. I've become very conscious, having spent the afternoon with you, that there are not so many pure basic research scientists in this room that are concerned with scientific technology per se. So I'm a biochemist. Hands up if you're a biochemist. Yes! The lady from Imperial is a biochemist. I knew it. She spoke with such a strong voice, she had to be a biochemist. So what I'm going to do is actually a little different to what you've seen earlier. I think I learned a great deal earlier on, listening to a point of view that comes from the notion of governance, structuring of the dynamic, the impetus behind actually putting programs into place. But actually what I represent and what the Institut Pasteur represents is really sort of the frontline agents. We are sort of out there in the field trying to make some sense of it. So somewhere between the community and the, if you like, the donator stakeholders. So I'm going to try to give you a sense of that by giving you a very high-level view of the Institut Pasteur, its history, where we're coming from and what we're trying to achieve. And I hope that that will contribute some way to the panel discussion that we shall have later on with the young scientists. So the Institut Pasteur in Paris, this is a shot of the burgeoning campus in Paris, which is a small campus that is effectively growing from being old buildings that were built back in the end of the 1880s to brand new buildings that are being implanted now with the very highest end technology and the ability to manipulate biocontainment of high-level pathogens for our studies in infectious disease. And the message I'd like to give you by the end of this talk is effectively that basic science is a part of the language of technology transfer, that somehow basic science and the knowledge that we generate and our ability to generate that knowledge, to generate the data, is very much a part of the articulation with the application in the field, which means public health impact, it means therapeutics, diagnostics, and ultimately technology transfer. And so a key element of the mission of the Institut Pasteur in Paris has been to establish not just the knowledge of the science or the methods for achieving the science, but much rather to really achieve the means to go about getting the knowledge and the data. And that's what we've tried throughout the world, in fact, to try to spread. And that's what I'm going to tell you about in a few moments. See if this works. This is a snapshot of today's Institut Pasteur network. So Pasteur Paris is one institute that is autonomous and independent and a non-profit institute in France, but it represents the bulkhead, if you like, of an international network that comprises some 23,000 people, most of which are scientists, researchers, engineers, field epidemiologists, surveillance experts, scientists working in the field, on the ground, in areas of endemic need. Oops, sorry, excuse me. Have to go back. Got it. Areas of endemic need, effectively representing a critical mass globally of a small corporate enterprise, a small global corporate enterprise. But what you have to bear in mind is that, in fact, all of the institutes that you see distributed from Bangui to New Caledonia to Fiocruz in South America and Brazil to the Caribbean to North America even, all of these institutes are actually independent concerns. So there's no global governance, there's no head that tells them what to do. Each institute has to decide based on local needs and local requirements, and that means that they represent the needs of the regions that they're in. And over 130 years now, since the founding of the first institute, there has been a new institute founded every 4 to 5 years. And so this trend continues, and that means that the Institut Pasteur globally represents the largest biomedical network in the world. It's unusual because it doesn't have a pure center. And so what I'm going to talk to you about is how we manage with that from the point of view of being in Korea, where in 2004 we founded the Institut Pasteur Korea as a part of the so-called Association of the International Network of the Pasteur Institutes globally. So as a snapshot to give you a sense of governance, in 2016, after the founding of the Institut Pasteur Global Network, in fact, it wasn't until 2016 that a voice was found on the WHO World Health Assembly, where a voice was found that represented all of those institutes. Now, this is a very important point because having a single voice is quite important for the policy making, so actually inserting yourself at a level where you have not just a common vision, but the means to coordinate that common vision. And so with that, this means that with this single voice, we're able to speak nominatively, We're able to speak nominatively of all of our activities from disease surveillance globally through to specific disease elements such as tuberculosis, malaria, all of the neglected diseases effectively, which is really our focus, through to the actual science of the affair. So how do you actually respond to an Ebola outbreak? How do you respond to Zika outbreak? How do you respond to the need for biobanking, pathogen and sample manipulation, providing that for researchers? So all of these coordinated efforts. So we struggle to find a way to actually coordinate those 23,000 people in those 26 countries and 32 institutes. So in 2004, having founded the Institut Pasteur Korea, it was with a singular mission that was actually founded on the basis of a voice between the, excuse me, I'm going to keep doing this, aren't I? I do apologize. I haven't got used to using this thing. Got it. You're going to have to give me extra time because this is a learning experience. Where's my Mac? Okay, right. The Institut Pasteur in Korea was founded in 2004 with a singular vision of establishing a very new approach, which was rather than trying to solve a local problem, we were actually going to install a new technology base. So the Institut Pasteur in Korea was founded not on the basis of providing, for example, vaccinations locally using local means and needs for local people. It was actually established with the more global view to discover new drugs. And that meant it would be a platform that would serve globally, both a domestic need and for a global need. So in the context of this vision, the Institut Pasteur in Korea was founded pretty much on the same common vision of the whole network, which was effectively to say infectious biological research. So the baseline is that you must do good science to get value, which means you have knowledge. And knowledge is value, that's why we do science. And so there is a value. I think the question was raised earlier on by a speaker, what is the need for good science? And this would be anathema to the Institut Pasteur network, because the good science is required to generate value in data that has sustainability. It means a piece of knowledge that can go into the future as a truth, as a scientific truth, if you like. Early drug discovery would be the application that we would turn our heads to. So we established the Institute in the vision of new technologies, innovative technologies for accelerating drug discovery. And if we had more time, I could get into a long explanation of why accelerating drug discovery and reducing costs is an extremely important way forwards for delivering therapeutics on a global scale. Ultimately, this would involve innovation in technologies, and of course, one of the bottom lines for the Institut Pasteur globally is notion of professional training. So what we learn to do, we share with all of our network, and we make it possible for all of the scientists within the network to establish the same techniques and the same methodologies and achieve the same knowledge. So the basis of that was fundamentally was to establish what at the time was a very new type of technology called phenotypic screening. Effectively, after many decades of big pharma effectively using so-called molecular targeted strategies for screening with enormous libraries of millions of compounds. In 2004, we had the vision within Pasteur that actually using an approach called phenotypic imaging, would allow us to have a much more relevant result in terms of therapeutics. Now again, if I had a lot more time, I could go into the details of why that is. I will not do that. This is not maybe the right audience to do that with. But suffice to say that the bottom line was that effectively we used images of cells. So instead of having a test tube with some molecules in where we would do a screen on a particular target, in fact here we would look at a cell, and the cell would give us the response that we would be able to understand using a complexity of imaging approaches, so that we would be able to screen compounds. Now, the power of IPK in 2004 was that it had the vision to understand that by using this kind of approach, parallelizing it with high technologies of automation, which at that time were advancing very rapidly, we understood that this would open up a whole new doorway to reducing the cost of drug discovery and accelerating the process. So actually the application was initially not defined per disease. So we effectively reached for whatever disease we could. We actually began looking at HIV, looking at a whole variety of parasitology type diseases, including malaria. And we've ended up now today, actually, these are pretty much our selected diseases, as you see up here, that we're working on today. But it's important to stress that the Institut Pasteur in Korea does not define itself as being the institute that works on malaria, or the institute that works on leishmania, or the institute that works on liver flukes. Much rather, it is the institute that uses technologies of imaging to extrapolate and appropriate new drug discovery in whatever neglected diseases it is necessary to do so. So if you show us a disease it's necessary to do it in, and there's a public health hazard, we will address that. So we're very promiscuous in this sense, if you like. Currently, in fact, some of the very exciting areas that we're trying to apply this technology to, and we feel confident, are in the area of Ebola especially. We're working very hard in this area. And in MERS, which of course impacted the Korean Peninsula just 4 or 5 years ago. So the net approach of this was, having established this very modern institute here on the peninsula, effectively this attracted, of course, international attention and brought us to provide these services as we developed these scientific research services for the purposes of actually Big Pharma came and knocked on the door, and of course we want to use these services. And that's great because it generates a revenue stream. We're a non-profit institute. We use that revenue stream then to generate drugs for neglected diseases. So that's all good. From the point of view of the domestic approach, in fact, we have and continue to partner with institutes and universities on the Korean Peninsula with a view to bringing our expertise in biocontainment and high-level pathogen control with drug discovery, which continues to be our major focus. So to bring things home a bit in the last sort of few minutes, what I'd like to do is to talk about how Institut Pasteur Korea, as a part of the international network globally of the Pasteur network, actually takes its lead rather naturally in the notion of the framework, rather, of SDGs. I actually have never really thought about SDGs as being a part of what we do from day to day, but actually I am rather an expert on the history of the Institut Pasteur itself, its founding, the basis of vaccinations, the basis of appropriation of drugs and therapeutics, diagnostics and surveillance, and actually SDGs are a part of our natural language since 130 years. We were doing SDGs before there were SDGs, is what I realized as I looked at the history of the Institute. And I think that may be true of a number of other institutes that have historically made it their business to go from a non-profit aspect to try to provide health services, public health services, to developing and poorer regions. And effectively, as our remit, that's what we've done naturally, as I say, for 130 years. So somehow, of course, that all focuses on health. So, of course, the SDG 3 is our SDG. And that's good. That's good. But as I read through the different SDGs, and I began to try to understand what is our positioning, in fact, we have a much larger role than I ever could have imagined. And keeping it focused, in fact, what I realized was that as I read through articles that describe the targets as 169 goals, I believe. What I did was I extrapolated the things that were most relevant, and in the context of good health and well-being, that seemed like a pretty low-hanging fruit. So evidently, we make it our business to establish therapeutics for the benefit of neglected diseases, and to give the knowledge for generating those therapeutics or monitoring those diseases to those that need it in the regions where they're in most need. So we establish institutes in those areas. So the result of that in the short term here in Korea is very interesting, because we built an institute here on the peninsula. It was invested in by the Korean government in coordination with the French government, the Pasteur Institute in Paris. The objective was to discover drugs that were relevant to not just neglected diseases, but also relevant to problems that may be on the peninsula itself. And in fact, as we proceeded down this route, we've applied this new technology in a way that accelerated enormously the process of drug discovery. And the example we see here is now, in fact, being commercialized by a company called Curient. It was a discovery of a compound referred to Q203, otherwise known as Telecabek, which is a new anti-MDR, so it's an anti-tuberculosis, multi-drug resistant tuberculosis drug. Effectively, it shows enormous promise as a first-in-class compound, and it took 6 years from bench, that's in the lab, to bedside. That means that we got the news, as you see with the date there. In fact, we got this news that Curient had gone through to a clinical trial 2B in South Africa with a large cohort just a few weeks ago. So the result here was that it took 6 years to go from the bench to the bedside. So does anybody know in this room how long it would normally take? What's the average lifetime it takes to get a drug from the bench to the bedside? What's the period of time? 12, yes. Who said that? Yes, yes, the biochemist. So we actually cut that time in half, and we did it because we came in with pretty much a cheeky idea. We didn't follow the big pharma. We did something a bit different. The Ministry of Science and Technology here in Korea understood and invested in that and put a completely new cheeky technology into play at a very high scale and allowed us to have a shot at this. Now, it could have failed. It could have failed completely, in fact, but it didn't. It was a success. And the Telecabek will be the beginning of, we hope, new MDR therapies in tuberculosis that are going to have really quite an enormous impact, because when you think about where tuberculosis is globally, this is a snapshot that I pinched off the WHO site, showing the distribution of the dark green clearly is the distribution of highest level of incidence per 100,000 people in population. And you can see, of course, that the areas that are the poorest tend to be the areas that have the most endemic disease, particularly where there's HIV as well, which tends to handshake with tuberculosis as being a disease of public health concern. But also, it was in the interests of Korea to think about this, because we see that this peninsula is divided in two. One half of it is rich, and the other half of it is very much less rich. And the notion of the poverty or depressed socioeconomic index is a measure of your vulnerability of a population to disease is clearly proven out on this peninsula, as it is proven out across the rest of the globe. So that by taking this kind of approach, taking a high technology approach with price tag of hundreds of millions of dollars, that necessarily you can accelerate a process enormously to generate real drugs for real value that have a role in the world of neglected diseases. And so that has a sustainable value because it will allow for low cost and introduction of new drugs that actually open up a family of drugs that can be used downstream. And I could explain why that's important if I had a lot more time, which I don't have, obviously. So I'm going to jump through the next few slides just to mention that in addition to health and well-being, actually there were two other key SDGs that seems to be very relevant. One is industries and innovation infrastructure. I'm not going to read it back to you because you know it better than I do, but to make the point that These are two very short, smart snapshot examples that come from KOICA funding. So in Korea, KOICA is a remarkable instrument of funding. We have benefited from funding from KOICA that have identified two very important projects from IPK. One of them using artificial intelligence to deliver automated malaria diagnostic in field, so this means in Cameroon itself actually, with a large cohort of 10,000 patients initially to do the primary testing, in partnership with a Korean company that has been spun out based on this idea. So the notion that we just all want to make big bucks when we spin out a company is really completely untrue. This company was spun out exactly to facilitate the building and sustainability of a new diagnostic approach for malaria using highest end of AI technology frameworks, high-end mobile technologies which are well connected in this particular part of Africa, in the context of reducing the time it takes to get diagnostics and therefore care and therapeutics to the point of care and the individuals in the field. So that's a very rapid example. The second example, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but it's the same program. It's actually focusing on leishmania, which has actually not a mortality burden globally. It does have a mortality burden, but it's not that as high as that would make so much of a problem. It's more actually the disease burden causes social index depression. Effectively stops people working. It gives them a very, very difficult life. And so it's important to be able to make diagnostic for this. Same model. KOICA funded this. There's a Korean company coming in, a small startup that are driving this forward, and then most importantly, an Africa partner. So actually we're doing it in the cyber accounts. And everybody buys into that. The Africa partners buy into it. The Korean company makes a sustainable model out of it. So this all has high value in the notion of partnerships. And partnerships are really where it comes into play. Just for 30 seconds more. That last goal, the 17, the SDG 17 partnerships and goals. Clearly here, we are a partnership globally. So the Institut Pasteur partners effectively all of those independent institutes in a manner that they can share their resources. It is difficult. We are not masters of this process, but we are trying. And I think that somehow that's the same challenge that is being faced by many of you in this room, that somehow having those resources, making them work together is a very challenging thing to do, and that's exactly what we're trying to achieve here in a third project that I won't go into details, using biobank resources and AI management. With that, I think I'm just going to jump a few slides now. There we go. So this is just about biobanking, and I'm not going to go into this in any detail. But just to finalize, so effectively the Institut Pasteur is a front line of work in the endemic regions in STI, low STI space where there's endemic disease need. We continue to work with visionaries like Françoise Berry-Senoussi, the Nobel Prize laureate in the discovery of HIV 2008, who is actually our honorary vice president of the association of the international network. And clearly, as I hope I've tried to explain, we believe that there is a lot more to public health and basic science that requires not just good governance, but per se the motivation and the instruments to allow for innovation, tech transfer, good project management, which was mentioned earlier on. All of these things have to come together effectively in order to have an effect in the field, to bring into play technologies for the benefits of the people that need them most. So with that, I thank you very much for your patience, and I apologize for the technical error. Thank you. Okay, should I step down?
Thank you very much, Dr. Spencer Short, for the introducing Pasteur Institute's activities and wonderful achievements with us. We will now move on to the last session of today's conference. We have some more special guests here, and this discussion is all the more meaningful, especially because of them, whom I'd like to introduce. They are members of 2 forums of our younger generations and have traveled a long distance to be here today. I didn't realize when I was writing this scenario that there would be so many of you sitting here. I thought there would be only like 20 or so. But they include students or graduate students, postdocs from faraway countries, including Russia, Australia, Canada, and the US. I would like to cordially invite them here as panelists, along with Dr. Spencer Short. As we are joined by the young generations, let me introduce about YGF and YPF a little bit. Please come up to the stage. YGF and YPF are programs hosted by KOFST. YGF stands for Young Generation Forum, and it aims to enhance the fellowship between younger generation Korean heritage students and domestic Korean students who major in science and engineering. YPF are the ones who are wearing the blue shirt, by the way. Stands for Young Professionals Forum, and it supports networking among master's, doctoral students, and postdocs. Would you all, we don't have many adults here left, but would the adults give a big hand to all of these younger generations? We really welcome you and hope you have a wonderful week here in Korea, okay? This panel discussion will continue to address the same topic, SDGs and future generations, and we will first like to hear from the YGF and YPF members about what role the future generation should take to achieve SDGs. And then we will move on to Dr. Short after that, okay? And given the time constraint, we're still trying to finish before 5. I will like to give you each like 4 minutes or so. And as the first panel, it is my pleasure to introduce Mr. Eugene Cho, a YPF member and also a postdoc majoring in metal material at KAIST. Mr. Cho, would you?
Hi, everybody. I'm actually in material science and engineering, but they kind of got that wrong. Just wanted to correct that. So I was kind of appointed as the leader of this because I was the only postdoc. And from this experience, what I've learned is that while preparing for this, we had a lot of questions and then a lot of ideas that came up for the role of the future generations on how to achieve these sustainable development goals. So we had ideas from during the YPF talks and the discussions. We had a lot of exposure to 5G and AI and big data and things like that. We had ideas in that aspect. We also had a lot of questions on how the development of STI itself could help in the sustainable development, as well as how having like a set infrastructure. So I'm going to give you kind of my personal opinion on this. So when I first was introduced to this session, I was thinking of more how the developed country was going to help the developing. But as we talked and as we went through the slides and as we went through the forum itself, what I've learned is that sustainability itself is kind of a worldwide effort that could be also applied to developing as well as developed. We, as a developed country, also research in energy. We also try to find more efficient ways to produce clean water. Poverty is also an issue, and things like that. So I feel like we, as the young generation, have the responsibility as scientists and engineers to actually build upon what the older generation has provided and take on their philosophy, kind of digest it, and make our own and step one by one forward towards a better future. I don't know how long that was, but thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Oh, the applause is much bigger now. Yes, the next presenter is Ms. Jian Lee, a YPF, also a YPF member, and a master's student in physician assistant studies at Massachusetts College of Pharmacy and Health Sciences. Ms. Lee, could you take it?
Hi, my name's June. I'm from Boston, USA. So I'm just gonna give my perspective from USA delegate. So in USA, we have an organization called KSEA, and that's how I knew about this great opportunity about the YGF and YPF. So I feel like as a young generation and future leaders of scientists and engineering part, we should be aware of the issues, like global issues. Like I knew about UN before United Nations, but I didn't really know that SDG was such as SDG was existing, and there were like 17 great goals that the current leaders were trying to achieve. So as a future leaders, I think being aware of those problems and trying to help out, like giving some donations, like $5 a month or something like that, it's not too hard for us, right? So I feel like having like those little steps and going forward to achieve the big goals are really important as the future generation. And since I'm in the healthcare part, I'm just gonna elaborate one of the goals. So one of the goals of the 17 goals were the number 3 was well-being and health. So like living in the U.S., the kind of developed country, not underdeveloped. So like living in the developed country, being aware of the goals and trying to do something, it's really important for us to do. And I think I'm just going to stop here.
Thanks, Ms. Lee, for sharing an honest opinion. Let's see, who's next? Our next speaker is also from the YPF. His name is Vyacheslav Kogai. Did I pronounce it right? A master's student in thermoelectrics at ITMO University, St. Petersburg. So it's in Russia. Okay. He will share his views.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. So actually, I'm studying in St. Petersburg, Russia, but I was born in Kazakhstan. I have some philosophy things about conference, and but I begin from some facts about Kazakhstan. So Kazakhstan, from date of its independence, demonstrate a commitment to the principles of SDG and sustainable development. As a rich natural resources country, Kazakhstan needs to invest in a sustainable future. And do you know how things really are? So, some facts. Average salary of engineer in Kazakhstan with a high education is about $300 or $400 per month. So, I mean, how are things really? How can we control, for example, ODI money, or how truthful are the reports? So, I think it's a very interesting question, isn't it? So, we have a lot of examples from history that STI lead to development, and but we needed a lot of new technology connected with the war and weapon, with the military. Maybe before invention new things, we need to make all countries be same on the same level. What I mean? Why somebody can use smartphone every day and another one have not drink clear water every day, or just not eat every day? It's a very simple question, but why? I'm sorry. There was some philosophy thing And now I come to IPF for new knowledge, for information about industry, education in other countries, and my colleagues are absolutely in different sphere of life, areas and activities. So it's a very interesting experience, and I get it, and I think that I apply this experience in future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kogai. We will now move on to the next forum, YGF forum. And the next presenter, I would like to invite Mr. Andrew Hong, chemistry major at UC Berkeley. Andrew, where are you? Okay, there you are.
Yeah, thank you for the introduction. I actually just graduated, so I'm definitely enjoying my time here so far. So I'm actually someone who's interested in going into academia down the road. So I wanted to talk a little bit today about sort of like the research infrastructure and how we as a young generation can improve the research infrastructure down the road. So, of course, as young people, we don't have a lot of experience. As research assistants, we're assigned grunt work a lot of times, and we sort of like go along this stages of doing more creative work and less grunt work, but we are not at that stage yet. But despite that, I think there are three things where we can really make an impact on research infrastructure down the road. The first part is cultural respect. I think just thinking back about all the presentations we listened to, one message that's pretty evident is that how developed countries can provide funds to developing countries in a way that's equitable and in a way that respects the culture and values of the recipient country. And in that aspect, we as a young generation are uniquely poised to make a difference. Growing up, since we grew up in a more technologically advanced and open-minded society, sorry for all these like grand terms, but we truly are exposed to more ideas. We have a greater sense of, in general, like equality, what it means to treat others with respect, and that's something that we as a young generation can continue to promote as we move along through our careers, and hopefully we can do the same for people in developing countries. The second part I want to talk about is open access. If you ever are in the thick of thin in academia, you know that publishing articles is very expensive. I remember talking to my PI about publishing a paper, and he told me that it would cost $3,000 to $5,000 just to publish an article, which is pretty crazy if you think about it, because faculty and other professors, they pay money to publish their papers in journals, and then they pay subscription fees to buy these journals to read them. So I don't know about you, but I think that's a flawed business model, at least for us as scientists. So, and one thing about the young generation that I've noticed, especially at my school, UC Berkeley, is that we're very much into the open access movement, where people can freely access articles and papers and not worry about having to pay for all these subscription fees, which are actually quite expensive. So, and I think open access is really a key issue in order to share data and findings equitably to developing countries, which may not have the initial funds to support high-risk research. And the last thing I want to talk about is startup incubation. This also ties back to where I come from, since I just graduated from UC Berkeley, but especially at my school, there was really this startup culture where people identified these areas of unmet need and tried to rapidly address them as soon as possible. Of course, some were a bit ludicrous and ridiculous, but others were definitely addressing serious areas of need, whether that's infectious disease or transportation issues or social justice issues. So in that sense, since we are young, I guess we have a little bit more room for risk. So in that sense, we can definitely take a plunge if we ever have some good idea that can solve some societal need. Yeah, I hope you enjoy what I said. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. Thank you for speaking about open access. It's a very serious issue right now in the scientific community, and probably we'll have a chance to talk about it a little more with Dr. Short. Next, our second YGF presenter is Ms. Yuna Park. She is a computer science major at the University of Toronto, and let's listen to her presentation.
Good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Yuna, and I'm studying computer science, mostly focusing on the machine learning and the deep learning. So it's a part of the artificial intelligence. So SDG, Sustainable Development Goal, we currently have 17 different goals with the 169 targets. I'm still wondering, well, what they actually measure, what they actually use for the measuring the achievement of the SDG, but yeah, they have to achieve it by the end of 2030 in the developing countries. The Republic of Korea, we are developed countries. So one of the developed countries, we have achieved a substantial economic growth in the last few decades. So as one of the developed countries, we also participate in transferring our knowledge, technology, innovation to the developing countries. So Korea, I think, has a very well-known education system around the world. We also have a cool smartphone we use for on our convenience taking the photos. But what if this has been transferred to the developing countries? Do they really need this convenient system that smartphone has? They don't really require this convenience of the smartphone. What they really need is the quality of the education and the clean environment and more the healthcare system. So currently in Korea and all of the developed countries, they all invest a lot of money in the research such as the artificial intelligence. But, But what if this artificial intelligence has gone into some developing countries, but they don't really have, they cannot focus on their money, and the government cannot really invest on their artificial intelligence. They transfer from Korea or Japan because they're not really in that state. They have other situations to be considered. So what I'm talking about is accountability, and we, as the developed countries, we have to take into account their environment and the education system and their current state, their environment. To be taken into account, and as a developed country, they should not just rely on the knowledge or the technology from the developed countries, but they also have to make an effort to utilize the knowledge and the technology to promote the economic growth and their better lifestyle. Thank you.
So Ms. Yuna Park just spoke as a computer science major about the relationship with SDG and computer science or ICT data, the importance of it. Last but not least, our last YGF speaker is Ms. Juliana Yuri So. She studies medical science and medicine at Monash University in Australia. Let's listen to her thoughts.
All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you for the introduction. So I'm Julie for short, and I'm a little bit different in that, like, along with a couple others members from the forum, I'm studying medicine and not straight science or engineering. And so I think personally, when I look at my degree and where I'm from, SDGs are more pertinent because, especially with what Mr. Short said, health is directly one of the major goals, goal number 3. And so I wanted to talk a little about Australia currently and the brain drain problem that we've been facing in developing countries. If you guys might not know, but Australia, well, it isn't a developing country, but like many other countries, it's a nation that's divided has divided towns in that there are many unreached towns within Australia, most populated by Indigenous communities. And so within the medical sphere, they've tried to really get more students coming from those rural and regional towns so that they can be trained and go back to the towns. But they've recently found it very difficult to force people to go back because once they've experienced metropolitan hospitals and the resources and facilities there, they're hesitant to go back to work in the same conditions that they grew up in because they realize it would be much difficult in treating patients. And so similarly, I think the brain drain problem that a lot of people were talking about today is more of is sort of the same problem extrapolated, I guess, in that, yeah, the trained people from those developing nations go out to different countries, and developing countries can't grow in STIs because they're lacking the resources, they're lacking the people and professionals that can help them bring them out of the situation. And yeah, I guess like in Australia currently, they've tried many different solutions or attempts to get more people to go back to those rural towns, such as giving more money or giving people, making people sign contracts before medical school so that they can work in those rural towns. However, it hasn't worked in the long run, I guess, because a lot of people, they either paid off or they don't last for that long in those towns of need. And so in the same, I guess, line, it wouldn't work necessarily to give people more money directly. So as much as ODAs are important, I personally think that training the locals and training the people already there and have links to the community is a more important way of solving the issue that we currently face. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Juliana. We have now heard all 6 of the forum members' opinions and thoughts. And let me ask Dr. Short to address his thoughts after hearing the younger generation's opinions here, or after hearing the younger generation's opinions, or even your...
Well, what do I have by thoughts after hearing these opinions?
After the whole conference.
Well, do I have?
We have 4 minutes there.
I'm going to need much more time than that. So thank you for sharing your opinions on this platform here. I think this is very important. I felt rather inspired to hear you all speak, to have your different views, and also to understand quite how diverse your training backgrounds are, from healthcare professional aspirations to material science. There seems to be everything represented there one way or another. And that's very important because it made me conscious of facts that we hit throughout my career, my 30-year career in science thus far. Problems that we've hit multiple times are about the transversality of communications between different disciplines, the ability for computer scientists to speak with biochemists, to speak with clinical field expert, to speak with infirmier, to speak with a clinical doctor, to speak with a psychologist. these elements are not easy, and actually more and more we find ourselves somewhat isolated in our own disciplines in many ways, and it can be very difficult to stand up in front of lots of people and speak about something that they may be expert in and you may not be expert, or vice versa. And so that's one risk on one hand, but then also there's the other risk, which is we stand up and we're not expert. We speak with the confidence of experts, but we're not expert. But there's no one there to contest us on that point. So somehow this communication is very important. We've found that is one of the biggest hurdles to trying to bring any kind of therapy or diagnostic care in field actually into play, being able to communicate at this level. That's the first point I'd like to make. The second point is to do with understanding the voice of the community. And I don't want to be devil's advocate, but it's wonderful that there's so many different nationalities represented here, so many different languages, cultural experiences. Many of us are individuals that have come from one origin of the world and ended up in another part of the world, either following our studies or following our hearts one way or another. But what I've missed this afternoon actually is between the expertise of the SDG and governance voices we heard earlier on speak with such dynamic momentum and such knowledge, and through to hearing now the young generation basically saying that they would like to accept the challenge to inherit what the previous generation have left us, and actually do something useful with it, with all the good spirit in the world. One thing we're missing is actually the voice of the client, if you like. So actually having people in the room that speak to represent the very communities that you may very well be referring to when you describe a developing country or a socio-economically low area of social being, not necessarily a geographic country, but it could be a region in a country. Sometimes we speak about areas and we don't really understand what within those communities they need. Now, just as an anecdote, I was recently at a reception following a board meeting of the UNITAID, which is the United Nations initiative for, I forget what the rest of the acronym is, but it's effectively focusing on malaria, tuberculosis, and antimicrobial resistance. It's a mobilizing force that controls literally hundreds of millions of dollars of budget that's made available through programs that are specifically aimed to target maternal mortality during birth, to target mortality in under fives globally. So it focuses on the problems that are really important, and that was why I was there as a representative for Pasteur. And what I noticed was many of the people that I ended up to meet during that evening, they were actually community advocates. So they were people coming actually from India, from countries in Africa, from South America, who all brought a voice to speak with people like me that are trapped inside our dialogue of science, or our dialogue of governance, to actually tell us what is it they need, what is it they really want at the end of the day. And so whether it's AI or whether it's a new drug or a new vaccine program, somehow we do, and I absolutely heard that come from this bench here, from this panel, we do have to listen very carefully to the people whom we presume to be helping with these initiatives. But with that, I'd like to finish just by saying I feel very inspired and very honored to be at this panel with the young next generation. I'd be glad to hand over to you, but I'm not gone yet. And I wish you all, I'm sure many of you in this room are on that journey. I wish you all the Godspeed and the greatest wind behind you to blow you forwards, to make a difference in this world, and to take forward these ideas and do better with them than we have done with the previous generations. I give you all a good wish to do this.
Thank Thank you, Dr. Short, for your very encouraging remarks to our younger generation here. I'd like to go on, but I think we are out of time and we need to wrap up. So thank you very much to our panel. Actually, to share with all of you, there was some kind of miscommunication and they didn't get to prepare what they were going to speak. So it was just all done here while listening to the previous talks. So please, especially give them a big applause for doing such a good job. Yes, and before we conclude, let me have Dr. Short and all the panelists step down to their seats, and we will invite the co-chair of the organizing committee for this conference, Dr. Ho Tak, Vice President of Konkuk University, for the closing remarks. When he steps up, please give him a round of applause.
Thank you very much for your kind introduction, Dr. Hyung-Ha Kim. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm the co-host of today's conference, and other co-host is Professor Kyung Chan-min. He is sitting here. Today at the 2019 Dasan Conference, I think we had in-depth discussion on the theme of the role of future generation in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. I would like to express my gratitude on behalf of organization committee to all who participated as presenters, moderators, debaters, and audience. Unlike previous Dasan conferences, where only selected experts talked behind the closed doors, this year's conference aimed to foster engagement of not only the professionals, but also young students and diplomats from foreign embassies in Korea, through its renovation into a lively hall of discussion. Starting with the presentation during the lunchtime speech, and during session 1 and session 2, we explored the ways to help science and technology communities play a bigger role in achieving sustainable development goals, and to expand international cooperation based on science, technology, and innovation through ODA, so that the universal values of mankind can be upheld. In session 3, Dr. Spencer Short introduced Pasteur International Network in terms of today's theme, and also in particular the role of future generation for SDGs and global cooperation plan were discussed with the participations of members from YGF and YPF, which are the young generation programs of the Korean Federation of Science and Technology Societies. It is confirmed that the programs such as YGF and YPF of the Korean Federation of Science and Technology Societies can be the base of platforms which strengthen the role of future generations. In critical times of global sustainability, being threatened by numerous serious problems caused by unsustainable patterns of human activities, I believe the 2019 Dasan Conference today was able to bring one of the most important topics to the table, which is the role of future generations in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. I'm convinced that it has been the resourceful and meaningful time for everyone here. I hope that today's discussion has planted a seed for continued interaction and deeper understanding for this great discourse. Let me conclude by thanking all of you for your time and valuable insight, and I also look forward to welcoming you again in the 2020 Dasan Conference next year. Thank you very much.
Now it's 5 o'clock, just past 5 o'clock. And this concludes today's conference. And on behalf of the organizers and KOFST, I would like to offer my gratitude for your participation and hope all the YGF and YPF will enjoy the rest of the week here and have a safe trip home. I hope to see you somewhere in the future doing a big role in STI and SDG and ODA. Thank you very much.